and Councilmember Yeoman. They will not be with us tonight. We've asked Councilmember Joe Paul to go ahead and lead us in a moment of silence, and then I believe we're going to turn the Pledge of Allegiance over to one of our troops. So, Joe?
All right, if you'll please join me in a moment of silence. All right, thank you. And then I'd like to turn the floor over to Troop 474 for our flag presentation and Pledge of Allegiance. Do we need to take the flag to that?
Come up and get it.
Please repeat the Pledge of Allegiance after me. May the audience please be seated.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, we have one consent item, the approval of the September 17, 2019 Roy City Council meeting minutes. Any comments, council, on those minutes? Do I have then a motion to approve those minutes?
Motion to approve.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, they're approved. I'm going to take the sequence just a little bit because we have a lot of things. I'd like to take Resolution 19-26, which is the resolution requesting the recertification of Roy Weber Justice Court, and move that up right now. It shouldn't take us too long to work through that, but we need to do that for other commitments. So I'm going to take item number 4 and ask that to be looked at. Andy, would you like to talk to this?
Sure, Mayor. Just really briefly, every 4 years, the council has to submit a recertification request with the state. And so the state wants us to recertify, so we need to have this resolution requesting that. It goes to the administrative office of the courts. So I've laid out everything in an attorney's opinion letter that meets all those requirements to be recertified. So we just need this resolution passed. That'll go along with my letter. Trent's submitted some other things that go in the packet to the administrative office of the court, so we just ask for your approval of this resolution.
Okay. Council, any comments on this resolution?
I make a motion, we approve Resolution 19-26, requesting the recertification of the Roy Weber Justice Court.
Okay, we have a first and a second. This is a roll call vote. Morgan?
Councilmember Burrell?
Aye.
Councilmember Tafoya? Aye. Councilmember Paul?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Approved. Judge, thank you. Appreciate you being here. Okay, we're going to go into, we're going to discuss then the amendment, which is Ordinance 1912, the amendment to the general plan. I'd like to approach this on this, from this standpoint. I'd like to have the applicant to basically do their conversation, their presentation, if they are here and they'd like to talk that. I'd then like to have the city staff provide the input to that, so we have a foundation. Then I'm going to open up to public hearing and listen to anybody who has comments relative to this particular ordinance. So with that, the applicant, is the applicant here, please? Would you step up, give us your name and address, and then share with us what you'd like to share with us?
Good evening, Council. My name is Steve Smith. My address is 1549 Chalazan Circle in Sandy, Utah. I think what I'd like to start off with is a little bit of a history about the property. Some of you are probably familiar with it already. We initially began acquiring the 8 or 9 properties that make up this particular parcel in 2005. It took us probably 3 years to get assembled what we see now as the property that this application concerns. Took several houses that were along 3500. We had some goofy little pieces and other things that happened, but we had originally attempted to develop the property ourselves. We put together a couple of different site plans as it was community commercial, and put those out into the marketplace. We were at ICSC in Vegas a couple of times trying to attract tenants and interest in the property. We had a movie theater that you might be aware of that had approached us at one time, and some other uses that had come to us. One of the things that we had originally as a family determined to do was not piece out the property. We'd been familiar with other developments that had been pieced out, and those projects ended up with orphan pieces of land that never got developed or were poorly developed. The tenant mix that came in was not very well suited to one another. It didn't make for a very viable commercial development. And so we determined that if we couldn't sell the whole property at once, we wouldn't sell any of it. And that's been our stance from the very beginning. And part of that has been because we wanted to develop something that would be a net benefit to the community. We didn't want to put something together that would turn into an eyesore, that would end up being difficult, that would go dark and other things. And so we made a determination early on that it was all developed and sold at once or it wasn't going to happen. And luckily we had the ability to do that as a family. And as I said, we've had several offers to do that over time. Obviously, when the downturn happened in 08-09, that became more difficult as Clinton developed. It pulled interest from tenants from Roy south into Davis County, and that made it difficult for us to find a project. So as we moved along, that's where we are. And so that's one of the points that I would like to make. It's been a little bit distressing to read on social media that as developers and landowners, we don't care about the community, because that's clearly not the case for us. Other developers, maybe that's true. But we have taken and carried this land for 15 years, essentially, and not developed it because we did have an interest in the community. We wanted to make it better. We wanted to leave something behind that the community would be proud of and would support with their business. And so those comments that have come out kind of stung a little bit, and I'm not sure that they were entirely appropriate. One of the other comments that I just might address too that stung a little bit was the suggestion that we might, as developers, be exerting undue influence on you as members of the council and on the Planning Commission previously. And I know that it's true for you because we have not made any effort to influence you in any way. We've not made contact, we have not made contributions, we have not supported your personal businesses, we're not related to you. There's nothing that anyone can point to where we have attempted to exert undue influence on the Planning Commission or the council in a way that would create a conflict of interest. And I just wanted to put that on the record as well. Now, under community commercial, there are a lot of different zones or uses that we can do, and you can see on that slide the existing permitted uses are big box stores or retail outlets. We could do a hotel or an office building or an elder care facility or something like that. As we struggled with this as a community commercial zone, retail has, over the last number of years, struggled itself. We have no further to look than down the street at the Harmon Center, the Marketplace Plaza, and the number of dark units that are there, and the difficulty that the Woodbury Corporation has had in finding tenants to go there. And so to try to build another center that is almost as big down on Midland Drive and have that be viable, I think is probably a stretch in this economic environment. It would be very difficult for us to do it. We would probably lose money. Well, we definitely would lose money on it from the jump because it would cost more to build it than we could get out of it in rents. Our ROI would be underwater. And so the use of this land is, as a commercial development, is fairly limited. And we can look at a couple of things. One of the slides that we have in has that retail big box stores, their stock valuations are down, their turnover is down, everyone's moving online. And even though most of the big boxes have an online presence, a lot of people are going through Amazon or they're going through other online retailers, and so even the big box stores are suffering sales declines even through their online operations. You can see some of those: JCPenney, Pier 1, Bed Bath & Beyond, et cetera. With those difficulties, we as a family had tried for a number of years to do this ourselves, and we were just not finding success. We'd been through 3 different real estate groups, as I mentioned, trying to get the property under contract and developed, and it just wasn't happening. So I have a relationship with Mr. McCandless of CW Management. I've been friends with him for 14 years. I've sat on a dais similar to this with him for 12 of those years, and we've had a lot of experience dealing with real estate and land use issues. And I went to him and said, hey, can you give me a hand? And he said, yeah, let's see what we can do and put something together. And he has probably, let's see if I do the math quick in my head, 42 years of real estate experience. A lot of developments, a lot of things that he's done, and a lot of projects that we've seen during our time on the dais, and also as he has done his own development through CW Management Corp. One of the concerns that the community has raised is that under the zone with the R4, that we could turn around and instead of doing the 12 units per acre that we propose, that we could do 30 or 40 or more units per acre, and that there's no guarantee that because we say that's what we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. Except that's my reputation and that's Mr. McCandless's reputation. Projects we propose are the projects we build, especially so for him. As I've sat with him and we've worked to build consensus among citizens and developers, among council members, trying to come to a vote with planning commissioners, trying to come to a vote. Mr. McCandless has gone to great lengths to build consensus and resolve issues, and he'll touch on some of those issues in his presentation on the project and some of the ideas that we have on how we might be able to make things work for the residents. So I wanted to touch on that as the landowner and the applicant, that we are committed to the project that we have before you. That if the rezone request, if that application is approved, then that's the project that we're going to move forward with. We're not going to change the layout, change the number of units, change the structure, just because the zone permits it. That's what we're proposing, and that's what we'll build. I also wanted to touch just a little bit on traffic. There have been some concerns about the traffic, and those are legitimate concerns. The traffic everywhere in Utah is at virtual failure. I don't know for sure what the ratings are on 4800 and 3500 or on Midland, whether they're at failure or close to failure. And the neighborhood in the public hearing of the Planning Commission expressed concerns about the cut-through traffic on some of the streets between 3500 and Midland Drive, further south from our property. And what we're doing is, yes, we're putting through another cut-through, but I would submit that this project would be negatively impacted by the current traffic condition, because rather than going further south to cut through, folks are going to come down, make the jog down Midland Drive, and instead of going further down to cut over to 35, they're going to cut through right here. And so this project is going to actually alleviate some of the traffic congestion or traffic issues that residents immediately to the south of us are currently feeling, because it will pull that traffic north into our project, and it would route through there as a quicker shot across than to go down and cut through a neighborhood. So I appreciate the time tonight. I'm sure you've heard a lot from residents, and we're going to hear more from them tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. We feel this is a good project for Roy City, with the school and the townhouses and the senior living, that it will be a net benefit to the city in the long run. And we hope you'll find that that's the case and grant our application. I'd like to turn the time now, if I may, to Mr. McCandless to talk about the project in more detail.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to use this microphone because I was told nobody could hear me last time. So I'm hoping this works a little bit better. And then I've got a little pointer here for Steve so that we can point out those things in the presentation. First, I've never been to Roy as a developer. My niece and my sister and my grandnieces live here. So I come here quite often. They live in some townhouses across the street here. We've been developing real estate since you got to go back to from part one, go back one slide. I want to tell you about a couple of the projects we've done where it's been difficult. Springview Farms was an open space project that we took on that was slated just to be all developed out. 50% of the site is open space, and we put through what I call is one of the greatest feats of our career, which was to complete the Jordan River Parkway from lake to lake. Did that from a perspective as an elected official. I did that as a perspective as an owner who owned 300 acres on the Jordan River. We created the Jordan River Commission. We lobbied the state legislature. We got lots of money, and we filled those gaps. And then I rode my bicycle from Utah Lake to the Antelope Island using the causeway and, of course, Gentile Street, because it doesn't quite go that far. And that was kind of a fun goal, but it took tremendous effort. Now, we're known to be the people that we just don't quit. Maybe we're too stupid to quit, but once we take on a project, we like to keep moving. That took us about 15 years, but we're dedicated. Capitol Park, that's the old Primary Children's Hospital. What a riot. Had a great time salvaging that project and donating the hospital parts to multiple countries, Boy Scouts of America, all kinds of players. And that was the funnest part of that project. We had to go through the Avenues Community Council and Salt Lake City, and it was difficult because we changed it from a commercial use to 56 homes, and they're, quite frankly, really nice houses. Canyon Center, 10-year entitlement period to get that done. 110 public hearings and meetings with that community in concert with creating an RDA product for Cottonwood Heights City. They'd never done one, brand new city. They were new at the RDA stuff, and that will be a phenomenal project and will be a model for parking that is desperately needed for Big and Little Cottonwood Canyon, because that's what the community needed. It would have been really, really easy and would have only taken us about 3 years just to build apartments. But the concept was to solve the parking problem, or at least give us a solution to it that the state can do. Now, the state of Utah recently, this year, in their legislative capacity, allocated $13 million to buy a gravel pit for parking, primarily, we believe, using the model that we put together. And we're glad to help them and glad to give them that model. Southtown Ridge, holy cow, it was the Exposition Center. I was a developer then, not a city councilman in Sandy City, and now employs several hundred people, has a lot of buildings, and it helped create that city's downtown vision. That's what they wanted, and I know that your master plan that you guys have just been doing to redirect some of the commercial work to the area just north of here is similar to what we did. When we bought Southtown Ridge, and we went in to demolish the old hotel that was there, I told the police and fire department they could use it for burning purposes and raiding purposes. Police pulled up, and then a whole bunch of residents jumped out the windows and ran away. It was a blighted area, and now it's a phenomenal place within our community. Health Center Theater, I was the architect of the process to put that together. If you haven't been there, I will be glad to give you a tour, because I'm quite proud of that project. But it takes more than just one person. It took Mr. Smith, and we created a centerpiece for our community. Salem Park, a mixed-use project, again, took us several years to be able to put together, right on top of 2007. Bad timing. Market failed. We stuck with it. We put in all the infrastructure we said we would do, even though our bank decided they weren't going to give us any more money. We still completed the tasks associated with that particular project, which was several miles of infrastructure to that site that we had to pay out of pocket because we made a commitment to people whose lives depended upon what we did as an organization. Everybody else ran. We stayed the course and stayed with the project. I'm not saying we're the best developers on the planet. We just live here. We're Utahns. I was raised here, and I have those values. Next slide. So what do we do with the project? Part one, Weber School Development came to us and said, we want to do a charter school, K through 6. It's permitted use in the existing zone. We said, that's a great opportunity. We know these individuals. We know that they will build what they will say they will build. There's no zoning change necessary to build this school. And it takes up, takes up a little bit more than half of the site. The remainder of the site then becomes part two. Next slide. Here's pictures of the school itself, and I think these guys have already gone to your staff and started the process. We expect they will close on this property within the next 2 to 3 weeks. They will be the owners and move forward on this project because the permission needed is significantly less than what we need to do townhouses, but it is permitted. So what's left? Part two. What do we do with the 3.5 acres? It's a long, skinny piece. We could do any one of those things that are up there. The one that rises to the top, of course, is senior housing, which is considerably denser than what we've got, but it's a permitted use in that zone, and it's most likely the area what we would gravitate to should the zoning application fail. So we went to a different concept and said, what if we went, that next slides, please. We went to an alternative, was rezone the remaining acreage into R4. And the plan for the R4 property is pretty simple. We want to build townhouses and sell them. They're not rentals. It's not a rental property. It's not an impact, doesn't have a negative impact, and it has a density specifically of 10 units per acre, as Mr. Smith mentioned. I'll bet I've planted at least 2,000 or 3,000 trees in my day. As a developer, I love tree-lined streets. Every project I've ever done, I plant trees every 30 feet on center because I think they're cool. My favorite tree is the London Plains maple, so maybe someday it's kind of fun to go down those streets and look at them. But we really want to make this an affordable housing project. Everybody talks about it. But then at the end, they just go up in value. People decrease the density, the costs get higher. We're going to do our absolute utmost best to keep these into the low 2s. It's going to be difficult to do. New construction, townhouse development. The one up the street from us on the west side of the street that's about sold out, I believe, is in the mid-3s. Not as dense, but I'd like to have some place for my daughter to live. And my son, who's a doctor, just getting out of the University of Utah residency, can't afford to buy a single-family detached home. And it's just shocking to me. So we're trying to make it affordable, do the best we can. Next slide. So the other little piece of that little toe section there, is the elderly care facility. Now that's a permitted use in the existing zone. We thought to keep it one zone. We'd put this property, that little tail section where the elderly care zoning is, with the R4. Now, some people have suspicions that we've got clandestine motives for doing that. We don't care if it stays in the existing zone for that particular parcel. If that concerns you, just exempt it out, because our intention is to put an elderly care facility similar to the Beehive Homes, where they are smaller, a little more compact, but more affordable. A lot of parents out there that can't afford to go and live in a place that's somewhat self-sufficient, right? Next slide. Here's a copy of the slide. Now, one of the things I mentioned the other day was that we had an open area. And that open area, you can see, is that existing boundary on the south end. I'm going to have Steve point to that. It's not wide enough for us to do any additional residential units there, and so we just leave it open, is the idea. Let some parking there for visitors and guests, and we'll plant grass. So what was intended to be said there is that open area then, for those people that live adjacent directly to that open area, would then be open forever. Part of that dedicated plat, they wouldn't see somebody else's house 10 or 15 feet away from their back fence. It's divided into two parts. You can see the school on the north side. I really like that plan, and this isn't a site plan, it's just for information. Got to go through your process for our project, and they got to go through your process for theirs, right? I really like the fact that that big field on the very far north end of the project is just going to be grass. It's just some big park. I think that's exceptional. Where there was going to be a big box commercial venture, it's just going to be grass. And I like that a lot, but that's just me. I've been known to be an open space guy. I'm the chair of what they call the Central Wasatch Commission, which is trying to find a way to protect our Wasatch Front canyons and mountains and watershed and all those things. And in 2.5 months, when I'm no longer an elected official, I have to give up that seat. I will miss what you guys are doing, but it's time. I've been doing it for 15 years. Let somebody else have the seat. You can see the townhouses running east and west from 3500 over to Midland. Of course, we'll have to get Utah Department of Transportation authorization to access their road and get a permit. We know that. We'll have to do a traffic impact study, a detailed traffic impact study, because most of the community comments were structured around traffic, which doesn't really have a bearing in a zoning hearing or a master plan amendment, but we're going to address it anyway. So if we can go to that next slide. The 4 areas that we heard from the community. Now, we've been doing what we're doing today. I've been doing this since a long time, since at least 1980, which is a long time. And I want to listen to the community. Traffic impacts was the highest concern. Of course, we'll, as I mentioned, have to do that study. Neighboring property values. I think I heard that 2 or 3 different times. How is this townhouse development going to affect our values as our residential community? Third is infrastructure. We've got people that are nervous. We're going to go in and tear out their backyards and then leave them with a destroyed yard. And the 4th thing was townhome and developer commitment, which Steve addressed, and I'll address just a little further. So that next slide. I hired Ryan Hills from Hills Engineering. He's a fairly famous traffic consultant. This goes way beyond what we're supposed to talk to tonight. And said, Ryan, tell me the differences between, I want a chart. If I got a 10-acre commercial project, which this is, what's the traffic going to be as impacting the community in that area? The traffic from a 10-acre commercial site, including the evening peak hours and the other peak hours of the day and weekday totals, is 7,200 and something cars per day. That's what he told me. That's just straight up facts. It's scientifically based. It's not, we didn't make this up. It came from Hills Engineering. That next slide is the residential part of it. This is based on a 10-acre project, right? So we're only doing 4 acres of residential. So when we do our traffic impact study, we'll have that pared down. This is as bad as it could get with a townhouse development. Total parking, or total traffic impacting the neighboring roads from a townhouse development with 12 unit per acre density is 800, and I can't read it because it's too small, 886, about 900 cars total per day. That next slide, and that includes the AM, PM peak hour drive times. So the differential was 6,356 less cars per day with a residential project of townhouses versus utilizing the existing commercial zone associated with this property. If traffic is the issue, which I believe it is an issue, and quite frankly, we would like to offer our services, we're property owners and we think it is an issue. We've dealt with the state and Utah Department of Transportation. One of my references is Carlos Braceras. I'd like you to call him and ask him what he thinks of me. We would like to go with you and join your forces and people that you guys have hired to try and figure out a way to get an environmental impact study funded for 3500 West so that we can move those improvements on that road up for future improvements and widening, which it's slated, but it's not on anybody's list. And until you get an EIS done, about $1.5 million is what we figured. The one farther south of here that's already been funded was $3 million. We figure we anticipate yours will be at a minimum $1.5 million, and we would like to go to the state and try to figure out how we can fund that. Now, leadership at the state level has, as you know, gone north. My business partner was the state leadership in the Senate for 12 years. So we understand how the system works, and we'd love to step up, help you resolve that problem. And we just think we're some more players on the ground, and we're property owners up here. We want to be community oriented. So, but it's, if you're looking to decrease the traffic, zone it residential, because it's significant difference, residential versus commercial. That is just science. Next slide. So community values. One of the great appraisers in our state does a lot of condemnation work for Utah Department of Transportation. A lot of, he's a professional witness. He's been a professional appraiser. His name is Phil Cook. You guys have probably used him. I know that Randy Sant has used him and recommended him numerous times. I called Phil because one of the concerns was your townhouses are going to have a negative impact on my property values. And so we talked about it, and I have a full letter. This is just one paragraph out, and I'd like to read it. I have completed a number of studies over the years on the impact on single-family housing prices of a variety of land use, including office, retail, industrial, and multifamily uses. Although every situation is unique, impacts are typically non-existent to modest. Where there is a negative impact, the most impactful are industrial and retail uses, which is what this property is presently zoned for. So we want to have a negative impact on the neighboring properties. Let us build a commercial project on that site. Townhomes are least impactful, which is what we propose because we want to be good neighbors. So but that was one of the concerns. Number 3 in the next slide was infrastructure. The sewer line, yep, we don't have that slide up, runs right through the middle of our property. All we got to do is dig down, and I say that more simplistically than it actually is because we anticipate dewatering the trench, pretty expensive, in order to get to the sewer, but we're going to take the sewer from our site, which is the most impactful to the community. The rest of the infrastructure utilities, rest of the infrastructure utilities are on or around our site. We have very little off-site work to do. We have to do the research. After this is zoned, we'll hire Ensign Engineering, who's our engineer, and they will do those capacity studies. So when we come back to you guys, we'll know whether or not there's a capacity study problem. Sidewalks were mentioned. Regardless how this gets developed, whether it's commercial or residential, we will install the sidewalks along Midland in our proportionate share as required through our UDOT permit on 3500 West. Most importantly, 3500 West land dedication needs to be done to preserve that corridor, so when you do get 3500 West expansion appropriated, that right-of-way won't need to be acquired by UDOT. It'll already have been given through the plat dedication scenario. One of the comments that was made, and I did this a lot on the Jordan River Parkway, where there were trail systems that needed to get across the river or a canal that had Army Corps of Engineers jurisdictional wetland authority. We just put a pedestrian bridge over the canal. put footings and foundation walls on both sides of the canal, and then prefabricated trail, bridge, goes across the canal. You don't have to widen that road. It's a really inexpensive way to get people through that choke point on 4800. And then because there's a road that goes on the west side of the canal, you could take the existing sidewalk and just take it across the across the canal, and then back onto the sidewalk that we plan on building on our side, with, of course, a crosswalk at that intersection. Next slide. Here's our commitments. First, Bridge Academy's committed. They're already there. They're doing plans. They're meeting with you guys. They will be closing, and they will construct an elementary school there. I think it's a great fit for this property, and it has a significantly less impactful scenario on traffic. Not as much as townhouses will decrease the traffic that's proposed, but the school is still quite a bit less. They know they have to do a traffic impact study as well, and we imagine that we will join forces and do the same traffic impact study collectively together. Our commitment to you as a city council on the record tonight and soon to be in writing is that we will meet that 12 unit per acre density or less, period. If we did sell it, which is, somebody adds too many zeros to the offer on the page, it makes everybody turn their head, right? But if we do that, we will record a restrictive covenant on the property that requires them to construct that property consisting of 12 units or less. And we'll put that in writing and we'll record it for your benefit, so that these folks that are going to stand up and say that's not true, that is true. If you call all the people we've worked with in the past, we step up, we do what we say we're going to do. I don't care if it takes 10 years or 15 years. We're pretty focused. And we will not alter our commitments just because it was convenient. 2007 came August 2007. Most players in my business, I asked my lender once, I said, so how many players did you have before that big crash? And they said 67 solid players, and we were one of their 67. And then in 2011, I asked one of the presidents of the corporation, how many you got left? And he said 6. We were one of the 6. We never asked anybody to discount. We always paid our bills. We made it through that difficult time because we believe that our word is more important than our balance sheet. We've done that for years. Anyway, last couple of slides, and then I'll ask for any questions from you. I think there's a couple more. We hope the community embraces this, and I took this out of your books, right, your plans. First, the project's compatible with the areas. Townhouses are more compatible than commercial, period. Less impactful on traffic. We've designed it to be owner-occupied. They will be their neighbors. That meets the goals of what you guys state you want. It supports the existing commercial vendors. We are confident that commercial in Roy and the surrounding cities, because everybody, including myself, has chased the retail sales dollar, right? I mean, Sandy City's king of chasing the retail sales dollar. We do a really good job of it. But that's changing. The internet is changing retail sales, and the state is going to change how we collect taxes. Confident that it's going to be another big issue. It was a big issue last year. It's going to be a big issue this year. And if we build more retail, we're just setting people, existing businesses, up to fail. I do not want to do that. They spent their lives and invested their money building businesses. I can build a really cool retail facility and cannibalize the existing retail operators in Roy. I know I can. I really don't want to do that, because I'd rather that the guys that are there today stay in business today and help them build your city to be a better commercial venue. I'm kind of a straight up Carl. All my cards are always on the table. Life's too short. I like providing elementary education. It's a quality life choice for the community, and I'm certain that a lot of the people that have already signed up for this school are coming from the immediate area. They've put out a pre-lottery statement, and in 2 weeks they had 100 students. This is a need the community needs. Provide affordable housing opportunity, that's what everybody wants. We're gonna do our best. And then the zoning and site plan meets the goals, the objectives, and the policies of the general plan. It's an outlier, we know that. He's tried to do this for 15 years. It's not working. Last slide, I think. Is this the last slide? Yep, thank you and questions. Sorry it
Okay.
took so long, I am long-winded, and I hope the audience could hear me tonight. Questions for me?
Okay. Chris, thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Do we need to go into public hearing first?
He's just asking questions. We're going to go to public hearing after the city makes a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Steve, you'd like to give us our city perspective then? Thank you.
As mentioned, this is a request to amend the general plan from what it's currently classified as. There's two of them, one's commercial, one's medium-density, single-family, to very high-density multifamily, and then also amend the zoning map from CC, community commercial, to R4, multifamily residential. Just an aerial map of the location, 4800 south, kind of towards the top, 3500 west to the right, Midland kind of cutting across. The vacant piece that's up above towards 48 is where the school will be. So the highlighted portion is just the area being requested for rezone, not the entire project, or entire 9 whatever acres. So from a future land use map, it shows most of it again being commercial with the kind of the dog leg end of the little outlined as medium density single family. Zoning wise, here it again, it's just kind of one of those, the zoning map doesn't meet the whole general plan. It's all zoned commercial. Just kind of throw it into what the site plan, kind of the overall, or with the school, the townhomes, and then the assisted living facility. In yellow is what is being requested for rezone. The Planning Commission held a public hearing, was it last week?
It was.
Yep, last week. All the comments from the public are in your staff report. There was quite a few people that got up and spoke. I didn't get it word for word. When you're writing as fast as you can, you kind of, again, generalize and summarize things. But I think the gist of what their concerns and comments were are within the staff report. Staff had recommended approval. The Planning Commission voted 6-1 to forward a recommendation for both the general plan amendment and the rezone, the zoning map.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. Okay, council, so we can get all sides of the conversation, how about, do I have a motion to go into public hearing?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. We're in a public hearing. What we'd like you to do, if you don't mind, just give us your name, your address for the record, and please, maybe you can keep your comments to about 3 or 4 minutes. We've got a lot of people I suspect would like to talk, and we surely want to hear what you have to say. So please, if you have an idea or comment on this particular ordinance, please step up to the mic, name and address. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Jason Spar, 4040 South, 1650 West in Roy. As many of you already know, that I was the sole planning commissioner who voted against this project. I did bring my brains with me, so I apologize for reading off it, but I didn't want to forget anything. So, at the meeting, I believe I failed my fellow residents in getting my thoughts on record during the planning commission meeting. I just voted no against it, and I did not make any comment. So this is my chance to make a comment, get it on record, I guess. As many of you know, passing of Senate Bill 34 and the pressure from other entities have put the city in opposition to its own residents in regards to the state requiring the city to push for more high-density housing. Well, it seems that most residents want the opposite. Well, I voted yes on similar projects in the past, and to help the city be more in line with what the state wants, I believe the location of this project is of special circumstance. While we're told to look at each single item on the agenda as it is on its own, I think we would be remiss in not looking at the project as a whole. So while the school is not on the agenda tonight, I think it'd be short-sighted to not consider it in the decision-making process. Of course, in my opinion, the entire area would be best to remain as a community commercial zone with no school being built, so that in the future, it might be used for businesses to provide services to residents, that they might have a way of getting products or services they need closer to home instead of being required to head to the busier areas of the city like 1900. Now, we have no idea when the widening of the streets will happen in that area, but that kind of would be key on it. If the land's got to stay vacant until then, I would rather it stay vacant until then, until we're ready for it. But it doesn't, all of this doesn't, okay, hold on, let me find my spot here. Okay, we have no idea when the widening streets will happen in the area, but that doesn't prevent us from being proactive in our approach to city planning. If the school is built where the developer wants to put it, and the remaining land would of course be a strange place to put commercial businesses. I don't believe most residents would be opposed to living right next to a school, but many would be opposed to living right next to higher density housing. So if indeed the school is to be built, my opinion is that the best use of the remaining land in question here tonight would be to match the rest of the neighborhood and develop it as a single-family residential. Thank you much for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else like to share their thoughts on this? Please, name and address. Thank you.
My name is John Grove. I live at 5011 South, 3550 West, so I'm very close to this. I have several concerns. The very biggest is the traffic in the area. It's miserable for the people down there to try to get out onto 35. You cannot make a left on 3500 a lot of the day. It's, you know, if you're turning onto 3500 from the west and you have to cross the lane of traffic, most people just give up. I go down to Midland because I live right on 5000 there. So I live a half a block from 3500, but I go down to Midland and then go out to 4800 and then turn up to 48 and 35 because you're taking, you know, sometimes you're taking some risks trying to make a left turn and go across, you know, over the southbound lane to get in the northbound lane. The school's going to make that much worse. Being as how it's a charter school, a lot of parents are going to be bringing their children to school, so that's going to impact the traffic situation a lot right there. You're going to have a lot of parents bringing them in the morning, a lot of parents picking them up in the afternoon. I'm a teacher, so I'm well aware of that, and I mean, I know most people are. I didn't bring up that last time because it was a done deal, and then we kind of got in a disagreement with one of the planning commission over that, so I thought I'd bring that up, and it is important too. Then you add, multi-unit, high-density, whatever you want to call it, to that. It's going to be, honestly, I hope you please will really consider this because you have 4800, 3500, and Midland Drive, and they're all big streets. They're all busy streets converging at that one point right there. The gentleman that's presented the plan here, he said that most people are going to go up that proposed road that, that he's planning on putting in there. No, they won't. If there's 20 cars, 15 cars waiting there, they're going to go to any other road, just like anybody, would. They're going to be coming up 5000 South. They're going to be cutting out up on the 4800. The traffic, maybe some of you are aware, maybe all of you are aware of this, but the traffic coming south and west on Midland Drive is a nightmare. It stops there at 4800, and the traffic is backed up for, I don't know, a mile further. You take and at that same time, when you're coming south, going south on 3500, the traffic is stopped at 5600 from the light, and I'm not exaggerating at all. During the busy hours, the traffic from 5600 is backed up clear back to my house at 5000 South, and people wait for an enormous amount of time. Now I'll admit I come to meetings a lot, but I get, and maybe it just appears that way, but it usually seems, and this is a new, for the most part, city council, and I appreciate that. I pretty much always feel like it's going to get voted, whatever the new thing is, whatever adds value as far as taxes and that to the city. You know, I think it's more important to consider quality of life. I think it's extremely important for the city council to consider quality of life in an area, and in this case, instead of quantity of life, and I hope you'll consider that. Property values is to me, is extremely important. Nobody can tell me that multifamily housing is not going to raise my property values, or only moderately. But single-family housing would, and you're not going to add a lot more traffic in that small of an area. I don't know why single-family housing has not even come up in any of these conversations. Is it zoned for that now? Is all of it zoned for that now? It says that on there. Okay, well, it could be, and I think that should be taken into consideration. I hope that would be taken into consideration for the quality of life in that area, because it is miserable. If you want to go somewhere, you have to think about, gee, do I want to fight the traffic? And I'm not exaggerating. I'm really not. If anybody is not aware of that, please go down there during rush hours, because it is miserable for anybody that lives down there, and people trying to go home or go to work. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to share their thoughts? Please, just your name and address. Thank you.
I'm sorry I got here late, but my name is Susan Boyce, 5123 South, 3500 West. It took me 15 minutes to get onto the road from my house. And if I can't get on the road, then I have to go circle around and go down to Midland and then up 4800. Traffic, like he said, is a freaking nightmare. There is so many times, if there's something wrong with the freeway, people will get off on Hinckley Drive and go southward on my road and on 1900. 2 Fridays in a row now, we have had traffic backed up for 4 hours, bumper to bumper, because they can't go on the freeway, so guess where they go? In the morning, every morning with the school traffic, you go anywhere from 7:30 to 8:30 to 9 o'clock, traffic going north is bumper to bumper, at least 5 to 6 blocks long. Adding more housing, and in fact, that school is gonna make it even worse. I don't know why, no one's gonna walk to the charter school. They're all gonna be driven, going to school, coming back from school, and it's gonna make the traffic on my road totally impossible. And I've lived there 26 years, but this last 5 years has just gotten worse and worse, and it's a stranglehold. For those of us who live on the road, we can't go in, we can't go out. If I come back from Walmart Way trying to make a left-hand turn into my driveway, I can wait for 10 minutes before somebody will let me in. It's that bad. But take into consideration adding more traffic to that road. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Appreciate your input. Anybody else would like to share a thought? Okay, name and address. Thank you.
Hello, Diane Wilson, 4302 South, 2675 West. And although this is a hearing for zoning for the townhomes, it sounds like the biggest concern for the citizens is the traffic impact. And I believe that the information and data we have shows that the townhomes themselves aren't the biggest impact, but that the school is, and that the school being placed is contingent upon the zoning change. And there are going to be some impact studies done. So my question is, if the impact studies show a significant deleterious effect with that school going in, because it sounds like the school's really the biggest impact on traffic, would it ever be considered to delay the building of that school until the infrastructure is prepared for that traffic change? Even though the zoning is appropriate at this time, if the traffic isn't prepared for it, would that just be delayed down the road until that infrastructure is in place to help alleviate some of those concerns? That's my question.
I don't think this rezoning impacts the,
We'll get the answers
Okay.
for you.
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah, I don't think the rezoning does, that's okay.
Okay, yeah, let's just let them all take, okay?
I'm Byron Burnett. I live at 4375 South, 2675 West. So you may think this isn't my fight, but it's everybody's fight. It's going to be in my backyard next. Just as a little history, I was in front of the Planning Commission in 2015 because they were trying to put apartments behind my home. And one of the arguments I had there was the residential inlay ordinance that protects donut holes from doing exactly what's been proposed. I also went down to the, visited with the contractor that put together your proposals for your general plan, and I know you have to send something to the state by December 1st. And I was concerned with some of those proposals for some of these areas we're talking about. Back in 2015, I fought that with the inlay ordinance, and I also argued that it's taken away my view of the sunset, which I've enjoyed for 47 years, and my privacy, because I built 1,000 square feet on the back of my home and a pool, so it was personal to me. Well, it's personal for these people. And my concern that I wanted to bring up is that this is a trend all along the Wasatch Front, and it's being fueled by State Bill 34, probably. And the key words in there is affordable housing and high-density housing, and they use that as your proposal today because you have to consider State Bill 34, and those are buzzwords. And we see that in the communities all around us. But you know, Roy's not Ogden. We don't have a 25th Street or a place that mixed use, anything goes proposals work, and we're not a gateway, and we're not even our front runner station's right in a donut hole of residential. It's not a place for some of these proposals that we're hearing. They're 4 or 5 stories high. In this case, one of the exceptions is on this State Bill 34 is it says allow for high density or moderate single home housing. And that satisfies part of State Bill 34 in this situation. But what I don't want to have happen is the city doing things that aren't right for the city or the city residents because of the state's Bill 34 to satisfy a bill that when I read it, there's other ways to satisfy the requirements and still not do things that are detrimental to the citizens of Roy. So when it comes to your choice and the decisions you make, I hope you lean toward the citizens of Roy than the state that's trying to get it through a one-size-fits-all for every community that doesn't work in our community. Some of these mixed use, it doesn't work in Roy. It's not going to be something that works here. And so I'm just trying to slow down this whole thing going on about high density being the right thing to do. And it's going on all around us. And I've also read about some of the other councilmen running other cities that are concerned about it in their own cities, some of the small communities around us. So I just ask you to make the right decisions when it comes to the state and the citizens of Roy. And I would like to, I addressed a letter to the mayor a couple of months ago about my concern about the plan that has to be submitted. And I just wanted to say I appreciate your immediate response and well thought of response. I appreciate that, Mayor.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else would like to share a thought on this? Okay, just need your name and address. Thank you.
Tim Roberts, 3613 West, 5175 South. I wasn't going to say anything tonight. I wasn't born here. I wasn't raised here. But I've been here for 20 years now. Lived in Sunset, lived in Layton, lived in different areas. I'm watching y'all do what town councils in other states have done and destroyed their areas. How many of you traveled California? How many of you complain once you hit the Cajon Pass that it's just cars and houses and industrial and traffic and everything else? I was raised there. That used to be nothing. Wide stretch of nothing. Victorville, Hesperia, all the way through Barstow. Nothing. They were little bedroom communities. Then they went, we gotta build. We gotta build more. We gotta build more. And then they started annexing little areas next to them that weren't part of their towns. Starting to sound a little familiar? We can grab this and make this part of us, and then we're better, we're better, we're better. It's not better. Overdevelopment is not better. Look at Las Vegas, Henderson, all those areas around there. They did the same thing. And now it's just atrocious to try and go through those areas. Don't overdevelop your city. It's not worth it. It's not worth your souls. It's not worth everybody here's souls to overdevelop and just make everybody miserable because they're just in a rural hell. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment. Anybody else like to share a thought?
Paul Carver, I live at 5390 South, 4075 West. So basically the other end of Midland, over by 5600 South. And I use that road every day when I drive to work. I'm not opposed to the townhomes per se, but all I really want to say to the city is make sure you make some changes for traffic, because otherwise it's going to be a nightmare for people. I picked the house I bought because it was close to work, only a 15-minute commute. And I see something like the school there, realize the impact from just the townhomes isn't going to be probably as big, but without some changes, my commute time's easily going to double. And that's a lot of extra time for something that's not why I moved into this city. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay. Name and address, please.
Dustin Coley, 4844 South, 3600 West. I'm not opposed to townhomes. I think single use would be better. I think bring less people in the area. And the schools, I think, is going in regardless, it sounds like. But just like the gentleman was saying earlier, you can never turn left coming out onto 3500 from that neighborhood, like ever. You have to turn right. So this road that's planned to go through, those guys will never turn left out of there. They'll only be able to turn right. So everybody right now circles down Midland to 48 to take a right out of there, to go up Midland to sit in that traffic or to sit on traffic on 35. And when you're coming back home from work, if you're coming home during the busy times, it's difficult to turn left into that neighborhood that's just south of this. It's been said before, you can sit there for 10 minutes waiting. You'll never turn left into here. So you go up to 4800 to turn left at the light because you'll get the green arrow. But there's such a short distance between 4800 and Midland Drive that anybody turning left onto 3500 from 48, that traffic builds up so you can't turn left onto Midland Drive. So for me, the biggest concern is the traffic in that area that you'll never really get through without more lanes or something. And then the parking for the assisted living home, I'm sure that it'll get redesigned, but where are all of these people going to park? Like, are we going to be lining the streets of Midland? Are we going to be bringing more traffic into Midland? I don't think the townhomes have as much of an impact as the other two do, with the amount of traffic they're going to bring in and the parking that's going to be needed. You could say that the people in the assisted living home that are coming to visit their families can park in the elementary school, but why not just park right in front of it and start taking up all the space on Midland on either side of it? Thanks.
Thank you for your comment. Anybody else would like to make a comment? Please, name, address.
Sean Henderson, 4833 South, 4150 West. I live, a little bit further west of this property, but I'm here because I think that one of the issues that people aren't really realizing is how this is going to affect people further to the west. There's hundreds of houses that this is going to affect, with this being a major intersection. I do have one question, if it's possible, to ask first off. Is this is the rezoning of this property in question to R4, is that rezoning contingent with the placing of the school? So if this isn't changed to R4, does that strike the school?
I don't, let me just, I'd like to answer all the questions after, but it sounds like you had a follow-on question you want to ask. The owners of the property and the developer will have to make that decision. But just understand, today, the school can go in without approval of the city council. It's zoned for it, it's permitted, it can go in. What is in question right now would be is the piece up there that's in yellow, the applicant is asking that we make that a residential component with high density. And that's what we're looking at. So the developer and the landowner can put that school in and not do anything with that piece that's in yellow if it's not approved. So it really is contingent on what the developer and the landowner want to do after this. But to your question, they do not need the approval of the city council to put that school in. That will go in whether if they want it or not, it's permitted at this moment. Does that help you?
Yeah, well, kind of. I mean, it just kind of sounded like the developer was kind of holding it on the hook a little bit, that if this isn't rezoned, then we're not going to put the school in.
And that's their choice. Go ahead.
So, I mean, I'm with everybody else that I have a lot of concerns about this intersection being, you know, the traffic on it being increased. It's a great study that he presented, but it's a generic study. I would really like to see, before this goes any further, that this gentleman, that they, you know, put their money where their mouth is, and, you know, maybe have some third-party input onto the specific area. This area is very unique in the way that it's a crossroads, and I think it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna affect, you know, hundreds of residences to the west here that have to travel through this on a daily basis and travel back. And it's not just that, it's also the safety of all the kids that are gonna be traveling back and forth, because it's a very busy intersection. It's had, you know, multiple crashes at it in the past anyway. And I would like to see some sort of consideration done for the children also, that if there needs to be some sort of a walking bridge put over at some point or another, to be able to make the area safer, then I think the developer should, you know, step up to the plate on this.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, thank you. Name and address.
I'm Tricia Clark, 4839 South, 3600 West. Oh, no, I can do my TikTok. I just had a couple comments based on, I mean, obviously, traffic is a huge issue. This is happening right in my backyard, so I have a vested concern. But a couple things that I wanted to mention is with the commercial property the way it is now, in the Planning Commission meeting, we were told that this is one of the last parcels, large parcels of commercial property available in the city. A lot of the candidates that are currently running right now have all made mention that they want to bring business into this city, promote business ownership. And when I look at everything that's been built out west, and all of those people in Hooper and all the other cities that have to travel through Roy to get to Riverdale and Layton and Hooper and Clinton, all those other places, I think we're missing an opportunity to provide. I know that business, you know, commercial properties would impact the traffic, and I would hope that something would be done about that before making any changes. But I can tell you as a resident of Roy, I spend about 10% of my income at Winco, Maverick, and Walgreens. Otherwise, I go to Riverdale, I go to Layton, I go to Clinton, I go to Farmington. I have to travel to purchase things because, you know, we don't have any restaurants. We have like 4 places to eat in Roy. So I can see that land, especially with all the businesses that are already there, it just makes more sense. I know the school's probably a done deal. That is gonna impact traffic hugely because there's no bus service for charter schools. So you're gonna have parents picking up and dropping off. I travel on Midland Road to 4800 South and turn east. Sometimes that left-hand turn lane onto 3500 West is so backed up, I have to wait for 15 minutes before I can even turn to get into the left-hand turn lane. Coming home on Midland, the old Midland, it's backed up to that new car wash. just dead stopped. And I see people cutting through residential areas, which is going to impact kids that are playing, accidents. I can see that, this may or may not happen. The townhouses, yeah, I think that's going to be impactful as far as not property value, but I can tell you that I've had several friends and family members that want to buy a house, and the second they see there's townhouses or apartments there, they're not interested. They look elsewhere. So just a couple thoughts.
Okay. Thank you for your input. Anybody else like to share a thought? Thank you.
Randy Clydesdale, 4881 Midland Drive. So this is a kitty corner from my house. I just live on the other side of the canal on the little Midland Drive. And there's not a sidewalk there to walk to over the canal. It's a tiny little piece of thing that you have to uprise over the thing. So if they're gonna build a school there, are they gonna build some sort of walkway to get over the canal? Because all you have to do as a little kid, if you're riding your bike, fall off that thing and a car comes zooming in. We all know how fast those cars go down that road. I have a cop that sits outside of my house every day for 2-3 hours, zooming past to get all the cars that speed. I just think that adding high density to that area would make it traffic funnel more down from 3500 down that road and then right past my house where my little 8-year-old boy plays, where the neighbors' kids play. There's a bunch of little kids right there. And the reason we bought this house in that area is because Midland Drive maybe was a little bit of a busy road, but it was a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood. I think we should put single family in there, especially if that school's gonna be there. I think it will just make it safer. And if there's a way to maybe do a U at the top so it doesn't connect to 3500, so it doesn't channel all those cars down into our neighborhood.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay. Name and address. Thank you.
My name is Trent Levitt. I live at 4844 South Midland Drive. I'm pretty much right next to where the nursing home, I guess, is going to go. My concern is, it's under my understanding that with the zone commercial now, there has to be a buffer zone between my house and like at least a 10-foot buffer zone. If it's changed to residential, there's no buffer zone. I am concerned about with me and all the other people that live right along that edge of the property. I know there's quite a few other houses to the east of me. What's that going to do for our privacy? Kind of having something right up next to your house. And they've mentioned that the traffic will only be about 800 and some more cars. Well, that's 800 more cars we don't want. I mean, it's already bad enough as it is. I mean, yeah, 8,000 will be bad, but 800 is still 800. And like, a lot of numerous people have said, they call that the Midland Raceway. I've sat out in my garage and watched numerous times when the police officers set the little flashing sign that says how fast people are going. It makes people speed up. I've seen people do 64 miles an hour right there. That's a little too fast for a 25-mile-an-hour zone. I mean, if they want to sit in my driveway, the Roy City Police Department, you're more than welcome to sit in my driveway and stop traffic. But another question I had or concern is there any way we can do anything to slow traffic down on that road? Right there where I'm on that corner, there's a stop sign coming out of the neighborhood. What about making a 3-way stop? What about speed humps? I mean, speed humps aren't the best thing, but I guarantee some of these people going 60 miles an hour, once they hit a speed bump, they won't go that fast again. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for your input. Anybody else like to share a thought? Thank you. Name and address.
I live on 4852 South, 3500 West, right on 35.
And your name is?
Rick Kirk.
Thank you.
Sorry. I've lived there for 32 years now. When I moved there, it was a 2-lane, basically rural road. I raised my family there, and it's been nice. But you can't tell me values on that road itself. The values of our houses are at least $10,000 less than anywhere else because of the road. And you can't blame anybody for not wanting to move there. You just keep adding more, like the townhomes. I don't know if they're townhomes, whatever they are, down on Midland down there where you put, thousands of them. it just brings all kinds of people, everything comes out onto Midland and 3500. And if you just keep putting more, I live right there. In the afternoon, you're not moving. I can sit there from my front room window and watch it. You're not moving for 15 minutes. I can come home, during that time, come down north on 3500, and it's 15 minutes before I can pull in my driveway because it's backed up all that far. I can't even get in my driveway. And, the school, okay, that we don't have a choice, and at least with the school, you only have morning, afternoon, and after that at night, then the traffic's pretty much nil. As much as you can. But I think what's happened is that property has been there, sitting vacant, I would guess at least for 15 years. And I have a feeling they're having a hard time selling it, I would guess, or it would have been sold a long time ago. They finally found a school to buy that part, and now they want to, what's left of it, they want to maximize their money and get as many people and much as they can in there, but it doesn't help us in that area there. And it's not going to help the people who move into that area either. It's just going to make everything even worse. And you can tout all your statistics and everything else, but I live there and I see it. And they say, you cannot come out on 3500 and make a left going north at all. You just can't. Even maybe later at night, but other than that. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to come around, and it just makes, if you're going to put density housing, move them away from the main thoroughfare where everybody is going to be pulling out. Do you see what I mean? It's just, move it out into a more, where people leave, they're not all coming out onto the same place where everybody else is already at. So, I guess that's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you for your input. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion?
Make a motion to go out of public
Go out
hearing.
of public hearing? Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Hearing none, we're out of the public comment period, okay? Council, comments, questions before we move? Any thoughts?
I have one quick comment.
Please.
In the presentation, it listed the schools under WSD. That's typically the acronym for Weber School District. That is not who is promoting this. That would be Weber School Developers or the state. So I just want that clarified.
Okay.
I think the one thing I
Go
wanted to
ahead.
clarify, and it was kind of what I was going to mention with Diane, regardless of if this rezoning passes, the school can move forward the way it stands now. We're not voting anything on the school. What we're voting on is to change that to R4 or leave it alone.
That's a state issue, the school, not the local school district.
Yeah. Okay. Let me
a
just
charter
share a
school.
couple of thoughts, some questions I wrote down so I can try to at least provide some of the answers that were asked. First thing is the widening of 3500. There's been a lot of talk about that. Let me just make it clear in terms of what the latest information is on 3500. First thing is that the project has been planned. I can give you the project numbers. They're PIN numbers if you'd like to know that, but that's probably not relevant. What is relevant is that 3500, it's a UDOT road, it's SR 108, and right now that widening project estimated cost is $81 million. $81 million takes it from 1800 north in Davis County and connects it to the widening project already existing on the part that's already cemented. You've probably seen that on the widening part that's kind of a little bit north on Midland. $81 million is going to cost to put that in there. I will indicate to you is that it's in phase one. Now, phase one is basically any time between 2019 and 2030. So there's an 11-year component period there, in which case UDOT has got that on the plan, but it is not funded. It's planned, but not funded. Best guess at this point, and I'm going to have more conversation about this on this and other issues this coming week, the best estimate would be is it will not be widened until 2024 at the earliest. UDOT has got all the projects funded that they're going to fund and committed up till 2024. So let me just make sure we have some understanding about 3,500 in terms of widening. There was a question in terms of taxes. Let me make it clear, public schools and charter schools do not pay property tax, in this case, sales tax. Royse City will not get any property tax on that school. It's a great addition to the community. It will provide a lot of choices, okay, to the residents in terms of if they want to put children there. But we do not get paid. There's no incentive on the part of the city to put it there. It is a decision, and it's being considered in large part because it's permitted at that location. And the owners basically feel it's a good place to put a charter school in this community. But no property tax, okay? A couple other pieces I want to share with you is infrastructure. We can't get the infrastructure in there until, as a minimum, 2024 on 3,500. 4,800 is a city road, and Midland, running down through that, I believe, is a city road. That is the city, and the city would then have to take any funding that we would have and do any modifications, any widening to those. But 3,500, up to the point it makes that turn going north and runs into Midland, that is UDOT road. And it's their responsibility to make any infrastructural changes at that point. Now, that means, do we delay the school until the infrastructure in and we get the road in? Interesting idea, but the landowner and the developer don't have to use that. They can put it in and start tomorrow. It's permitted to do that. So it's really up to them that they can put that school in anytime they want. Deadline on SB 34. This is Senate Bill 34, and let me just make a couple of points here so there's no confusion about this, okay? The reason why Senate Bill 34 is important to Royse City and every other municipality is because this last legislator put some interesting requirements in there. Royse City has to meet the requirements of 4, let me repeat, 4 of the 23 elements outlined in Senate Bill 34. It is the state law. This is not anything that I had any choices on. We got handed this like every other municipality got handed to Senate Bill 34. What is important to recognize, we think at this moment we can be compliant with 3 of those 4. What's going to get us in trouble is going to what happened at the transit station. The transit station gets a little more complicated because it's very clear in that law what Royse City has to do to have that front runner transit station. We have to be in compliant with the strategies outlined in number G and H. You can read it if you'd like. It's not a pleasant read, but it's in there. Now, why is this important to Royse City? Interesting enough, in that same law, it says this: if Royse City or any other municipality does not become compliant with Senate Bill 34, then Royse City could lose transportation investment funds. Now you say, so what? It is the transportation investment funds that will widen 3,500. It is the transportation investment funds that will widen 5,600. And it's going to be the transportation investment funds that are going to basically change, if you will, any type of change that needs to happen to that Interstate 15 interchange we have there. And it is old and it's got to be updated. These are realities. The legislator simply says we're going to put a stick in this law, and they got a stick. We don't get compliant, we could lose that funding. Are we okay with that? And we cannot survive with all of the testimony I heard tonight if we don't get 3,500 widened. It has to happen. There are no choices. No choices. And here's the reason why it's no choice. It isn't so much the fact you're going to hear, and I would suspect the council may make a comment on this, we're almost built out. The problem is not Roy. The problem is what's planned for West Haven, what is planned on the horizon in Hooper. Take a look at what's happening there. They have got a significant development program going on 4,000. And our concern would be is, and the record is pretty clear, they're basically using Roy City as a transit. They're transiting through Roy City, either from north to south or from west to east to get to the interstate. We are got a lot of traffic, it is not our own. And so we've got to get those state roads widened in order for us to be able to meet the demands, because it is getting crazy out there. For everything that you have testified tonight is what's happening. We're working it, but recognize that's created a challenge for us. Last couple of things. Buffer zone. The question was asked, the buffer zone between the assisted living facility that's being proposed and the residential. Interesting enough, there might be very well an ordinance right behind this that might talk a little bit about that buffer zone. Might be want to stick around to listen to that because it'd be a good conversation. But the reality is, yes, there is probably a difference, but let me make it clear. They have a right, if they do nothing else in terms of getting R4 tonight proposed approved, the developer and the landowner could put that assisted living in that community commercial space, as well as the school. They are both permitted.
But the screening's different between the current and the proposed.
Exactly, and we're going to talk about that here in a second. And can we slow down the traffic on 3500? That's a UDOT road. But to the question, can we slow it down on 48, and can we slow it down on the other part of Midland? Absolutely. If the answer to that question is we need to consider speed humps, then we've seen some evidence it works. If the answer would be is we can make some changes in terms of these calming devices that are available in the transportation plan, yes, we can. I would really strongly recommend if there's some issues, and I was shocked with the word 65 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. That's disastrous. I will testify you, if I had young children, they would not be playing in my front yard if I witnessed that, ever. So the point is that you as residents have a lot of influence in terms of trying to help on city roads making the appropriate changes. Okay. I wanted to make sure I answered as many questions as I possibly can in terms of that. It is now the time, since we're no longer in public comment period, it is now the time for me as the mayor to basically ask for a motion to approve ordinance number 19-12 to amend the general plan future land use map from commercial and medium-density single-family residential to very high-density multifamily residential. Do I have a motion to approve? Do I have a motion to approve? In absence of a motion to approve, this ordinance is dead. Okay? And because we needed ordinance 1912 to be the first one approved, therefore ordinance 1913, which is the one right behind it, which is in fact the amendment to the zoning map, needed the amendment to the general plan to take place first. And in absence of a motion to approve ordinance 1912, then I have to say ordinance number 1913 is dead. Okay? Done. Now we're going to move to item number 2 on the action item list. Public hearing. We're going to discuss ordinance 19-14, amendment to the zoning, Title 10 zoning regulation. I'm going to open up to public hearing. I'll first open up to the city, okay? And then we'll ask for public input in terms of a public hearing. So with that,
Do we want to wait for?
I got to wait for him because I need 3 votes. What's that?
He said, sorry, I'll sorry.
We'll just take a break? Yeah, we'll just take a couple of minutes until he returns, and then we'll have our 3 council members in order for you to move to this, this public hearing. Okay, so just take a couple of minutes if you would. Yeah, that's fine. this initial. And our police officers are here. I almost guarantee you they will step up and inspect. Does anybody need anything signed for the school? While we got a second? Okay. Okay, that's fine. I just want to make sure if they need to get something signed, we get those signed for them. Okay, are you ready? Okay. We need to go ahead and go into the public hearing. We're going to talk, first we're going to talk about from the staff, consideration of ordinance 1914. And that's an amendment to Title 10. So Steve, if you'd like to open up and have a conversation, please, if you'd like to share, just sit down and we'll work through this together, okay? Thank you.
Okay, this is not a request. Staff was looking at this aspect. It kind of came up during a development in a different part of the city where there was some ambiguity in the ordinance. When it talked about requirements in between a non-residential zone and a residential zone. So interesting enough when someone brought that up. Just as a side note, for multifamily, R4, R3 to residential, it's 20 feet. So you have a 20-foot distance. So commercial-wise, depending on what goes on tonight, it may change or it may stay the same. Anyway, as mentioned in your staff report, the Planning Commission did have a public hearing on this aspect last week. They received 0 public comments during it. They've actually been working on this for the last 3 work sessions, so the last 3 months, looking at every aspect of the ordinance to really give a better, for lack of better words, better screening options for the developer and the residents. They looked at 6 different cities, 5 within Utah, 1 in Arizona that we found that they kind of liked. They really liked a neighboring city and what they offered. That city offered options. So say you're a commercial development and you're 85% impervious surface, you have 15% landscaping, and you're butted against a residential, which is usually, is quite different. You landed in a particular table. In this case, it was G. And so you just go to that table, and under G, they gave you 4 options for setbacks and landscaping requirements. The Planning Commission really liked that to give options from the developer side, where it wasn't just, it's going to be this at this distance, no matter what you do. So bear with me as I go through it. It's going to be very long. Just as a reference, the stuff that's bolded in blue is to be added. The stuff that is bolded in red and struck through is to be removed. So we start in table 10-2, which is in 10-10-24. Right now, the minimum setback requirements for side and rear is 20 feet or 1 foot for every foot height of building, whichever is greater. The ambiguity comes in what is required fencing-wise. One section of the ordinance which we'll look at required masonry wall and gave no options. Another section allowed for vinyl, wood, chain link with slats. So again, the ambiguity came into play, and when you have ambiguity, the developer gets to choose what they want. So most of this was to clean that language up in all aspects within the zoning ordinance. So it kind of took some time for staff to get it all together, and then Planning Commission to look through it and figure out what they wanted. So here's the table. What they would propose is to remove the rear and side setbacks as it's written, and then give you 4 different options. Now, once the developer made the choice, say he wants to do 20 feet, a 20-foot setback, a 20-foot buffer from their building, everything else is pretty much set into place. And it's going to be kind of hard, but that's why to the far right, you kind of have a picture of landscaping-wise of what it would entail.
So the choices are for the developer, nobody else. He comes in and says, I want to pick A instead of C.
Right.
That's what it's going to be.
Right. So the options they gave was 15, 20, 25, and 30. Right now, it's 20 feet or whatever's greater. So if you have a building that's 18 feet tall, it's 20 feet. But our current landscaping requirements, and I'd have you go through the ordinance to tell me what required to be within that aspect, there's nothing. No trees, no shrubs, no evergreens. It can be river rock, and that counts as landscaping. So when the Planning Commission looked at it, they liked the options that Clinton gave that required landscaping. So if you think about it, if it's 15 feet, yes, it's a short distance horizontally, but you'll have more large trees. So the numbers wise for canopy trees and stuff looks at canopy trees, which is 20 to 40 feet tall. Evergreens, there's more of them, more understory, because the fence requirement is masonry, solid, 6 foot. As a resident, I can't see through the masonry, so do I really need a lot of short growing plants? No. So the thought was get more of the upper, more have a vertical screen rather than a distant screen. Opposite, if I pick 30 feet, my options for fence is vinyl view, and I'll get into what that means, and chain link living. Living meaning a living material be planted on it so it grows. But now we have a distance separation, so there's not gonna be as lot of vertical, but because you can see through it, there'll be a lot more of the understory, a lot of the smaller plants. So that's what kind of the fence height and types, and we'll kind of talk about that. The required planting units, this is per 100 feet. If I have 200 feet of side or rear yard, so we take that number, so in this case, I'd have to have 5 canopy trees in that 200 feet. I'd have to have 4 understory, yada, yada, go on. So it's complex, but not as complex as the neighboring city. I don't have to figure out what's your impervious surface ratio between the commercial and the residential and find that chart. This is just set. The Planning Commission really liked this idea, and we worked 3 months to bring it to this point. So with that, we'd kind of eliminate some of the ambiguousness of the required screen wall that was in Chapter 10, Section 31, and the required landscaping. It says a 10-foot landscape strip. Well, this chart says it's going to be 15 feet, 20 feet, 25, or 30. So do we really need the 10-foot landscape if we've already got the landscaping requirements in that table? Same with this section, 10.10.36. Again, it just talked about solid site obscuring fences, 6 feet tall. Again, trying to get through the ambiguity-ness of it all. The next section was 10.17.2. This is where that table came in that said if you want to screen stuff, again, screening walls or fences in 10.10.31, here it says it could be a minimum 6 foot tall solid fence with either wood, vinyl, chain link with interlocking opaque slats. That's where the ambiguity came. Masonry or all of this. So we want to clean it up. Well, when I went through this particular table back in 2014 when this was brought in, it was only talking about outdoor storage for commercial developments, not between residential and commercial, as the storage of stuff that they may have. So in part 2 of 10.17.2 is adding the words using options within table 17.3, and then top of table 17.3, these screening options are only available for the screening of outdoor storage. So it can't be confused with the other aspect. So again, to them, that really cleaned it up. Going into the definition of what fences are, currently we had fence open and fence slight obscuring. I really have no idea what those were, because it didn't mention it in the ordinance anywhere. So this is where when we looked at Arizona, it's Queen Creek, Arizona, they had these 4 options of fencing. So fencing living, a hedge of vegetation, or something that's going to have maturity would block the entire view. But at the beginning, it wouldn't. Fence partial view, so you'd have a 33% of the fence being view through, fence solid, and fence view. We created a little picture to kind of give you an idea of what those are. Here it's just a solid block wall with wrought iron, but it can be same thing with vinyl. So you have a 6 foot vinyl, or 6 foot solid, 6 foot partial view. So if you have a 6 foot fence, 4 of it has to be completely solid. The other 2 feet can be open and viewed. A view is half and half, 50%, and then you have a chain link living I'm sorry, I can't draw living material in a CAD program, so I'll let your imaginations go on that one. So again, the Planning Commission had worked hard at looking at this to be able to get rid of that ambiguity, to make it more consistent, but also not necessarily favor the developer, but again, help the resident. If the developer said 15 feet, it's got to be a six-foot masonry solid fence. If they say, no, I'm going to do 20, then it'd be a vinyl solid or a masonry part view. 25 feet, it's vinyl part view or a mason view. Again, they gave them options of what they want to do, but as soon as they picked the depth, the amount of landscaping, the amount of trees was already set. They didn't have options to do that. All their options were just which setback they were going to do. So staff would recommend approval as well as the Planning Commission.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Good rundown. Okay.
And that's on every,
Yeah, that would face the residents. So if you have residents on just one side, this would apply. If I had commercial on everything, then it wouldn't.
Steve, how does this even go in, let's take our last big issue, okay? Regardless of what we put, you come back and say, you know, fire chief says, hey, it doesn't meet fire code. You're back, okay, which one do I do, which one do I don't do?
Well, the
What do we
fire
gotta
department
do?
needs 25 feet.
This doesn't alleviate that one bit.
No, but it still requires, you have to have that many number of trees.
Which the fire department can say it's a fire hazard, I can't do that. then
I
we're
just gotta
back.
cut them up a certain height. Right now, I can have river rock and meet our ordinance. So this aspect was, you know, you're gonna have some landscaping. Now, in this particular case, yeah, there was sections where the fire department had to have, and it was a state fire marshal, not necessarily ours, required certain distance. Doesn't mean all of a sudden I don't put majority of it where I can. Again, I'm trying to get through the ambiguityness and get rid of it and
Well,
help.
it's still kinda there then, from what we're talking about.
Well, I mean, that scenario was unique in and of itself.
Okay.
There are no other areas in the city that might be unique like that?
Well, I mean, we
Yes.
just talked about one that didn't get approved. But I don't know how else to get rid of that.
We don't want to go through that
I mean,
again.
you said you gave them 4 choices, but let's be real, who's gonna take a 30-foot setback? These
Well,
guys are
I
gonna
mean,
take their money and their business.
Without
Nobody's gonna get a
divulging
30-foot.
which community they looked at, go to Clinton's Walmart versus Clinton's Lowe's versus Clinton's Old Albertsons.
Which is a heck of a lot different from what we were
No,
going to.
the developer for Walmart picked 50 feet. He picked a 50-foot setback. Why would he do that?
Less money in landscaping.
He put the road around the backside of it, around the side of it.
But
and-
it's 50 feet. Lowe's
right.
picked 30.
Lowe's has more landscaping.
They have more landscaping, but the distance was shorter.
Yeah.
So it comes into what does the developer want, and then they're stuck with how much landscaping they have to have.
Yeah.
It may be easier to do a 30-foot setback and a less, invasive fence, or if he's short on land and has to do a 15, then he's gonna have a bigger fence, so to speak.
We
Okay.
won't have anybody do a 30-foot setback for what we have left. That's just-
Again,
Yeah, that's just.
Choice.
Who we are.
I make a motion to go into public hearing.
I think, Steve, you okay, everything?
Yep.
Council, any? Okay, let's go ahead and have a motion to go into public hearing.
second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we're in a public hearing. This is consideration of ordinance 1914, amending the Title 10 zoning regulation as explained by staff. Anybody like to share a thought? Please step up the mic, name and address.
Braden Stander, 5544 South, 3750 West, Mayor, Council. Thank you. So I was actually at the planning meeting when this was discussed, but I had an emergency phone call and had to step out. So Steve, I apologize, I didn't get to make comments during there. The couple questions I have, I mean, this whole thing started and was in the review process because of concern for privacy to the citizens. And looking here, it looks like, we had 20, the new one pulls us back to allow now 15. It doesn't address the height concerns that is still an issue today for many residents. You know, luckily for me, my issues are resolved, but many of those residents, the height of the fence isn't addressed in here, which I think is a concern that we still need to look at. And then if you go to, let's see, this one right here. So we talk about the opaque fencing. It's about privacy, but then we talk about, oh, we'll put wrought iron on the top. Well, that still gives me the ability to be backed up to a commercial property where I have a 3-foot opaque fence and people still looking over into my yard. So I don't know as if we've completely addressed the, and we say ambiguity, but I think that in this situation, one specific code should supersede a general code. So I don't know as if there's ambiguity there, but either way, I don't think we've addressed all of the concerns that we were trying to do with this particular plan. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, please.
Jason Spar, 4480 South, 1650 West. The planning commission, when we worked on this one, some parts of it were, it was to give more options for making the city a little bit nicer view-wise, instead of just having one specific material choice or one specific wall. It's, although we haven't come out with the new form-based code yet, it's kind of falling in line with some of the ideas that form-based code comes with. And so this was kind of a step towards moving in that direction before we had the form-based code put out and laying some groundwork for it. But if there's some more work that we need to do to it, then definitely we'll open to suggestions and we can bring it back and rework it if needed.
Okay. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay. Name and address. Thank you.
Corey Crossley, 5552 South, 3750 West. So, council and mayor, I just had a couple questions. So, if this is to pass, how does it affect prior developments that were under the 10-31? And what the law was at the time that the build happened?
I'm not so sure we can basically reflect on the past.
It wouldn't be retroactive.
Yeah.
Go forward.
It's from this point when it's approved to the future.
And one of the components of the proposed change, if I understand it right, is that when there is a area that's been built up for a retaining wall, that allows a fence to be built at the ground level that would go up to at least 6 feet height where that retaining wall stands. Is that accurate? So the fence, let's say it could be 10.5 or 11 feet from the ground up.
I can't answer that, maybe.
We left in the aspect that if there's a retaining wall, the fence has to go on, if there's a difference in height.
Okay, so if there's a difference in height and one piece of the property is higher, then the fence is set on top of the higher piece. Okay.
So 6-foot fence on top of retaining wall.
So if the fence is supposed to be masonry and it can't be constructed on the retaining wall, would this provide for the higher height? Say if it's 10.5, 11 feet from the ground.
How does that work, Steve? Does the retaining wall would have to support the fence?
Yeah, you'd almost have to do that, yeah. Okay. I'm not the engineer, but I would think, based on what I think is read, if there is in fact a separation of height, the fence, whatever the fence may, has to be put on the higher portion. If it's a retaining wall, then it goes on top of the retaining wall. Now, your comment, I think, is can a masonry fence sit on a retaining wall and be structurally put on that? I don't know that answer. Comment?
Well, again, the retaining wall has to be engineered to handle the weight. Yes.
Yeah, it would have to be some engineering approach to determine, because it's carrying not only the height area, but it's also carrying now whatever that masonry fence would be on top of it. So it would definitely be an engineering issue.
If I read that it said you couldn't build a berm to make it higher? It's not a berm. Or not
so they can raise the property up, but the 6-foot fence has to be on.
Well, again, is the height difference at property line or 10 feet in from property?
You tell me
If
that.
it's 10 feet in, I can't require a wall on his property to give somebody else 10 feet of their land.
So how do you determine that? Because that could
It's
be in
at
this situation.
Height difference at property line.
It's the height difference at the property line. That's the only way you can do that. Otherwise, either party would have to basically say then, if I want to basically build a taller fence, and they just happen to have a retaining wall that's taller, I guess they can put a 6-foot fence based on what I read on top of their property. But I think the comment is that if it's two properties sitting there, this discussion really is a discussion about what's on the property line. I don't know how else you can do it,
So if
unless
they build up and they leave a 10-foot buffer all the way around, it doesn't matter then.
it's at the property line level. Otherwise, if the property owner says, yeah, I have a retaining wall and I want to put a fence on the top of the retaining wall, I guess they can approach the city, but I'm not so sure that's legal. I think what we're talking about is the buffer zone between property lines. Here's the building and here's the property line, and I sense from this, it's what's on the property line. I mean, that's like, see, I can put a higher fence inside my backyard, inside my fence. You know, I've already got a 6-foot fence, maybe I want a bigger one or a higher one. And I'm not sensing that what I'm reading here, I don't know if I can do that inside of my own property. But on the property line, I think what you proposed, if you're going to put one at 15 feet, it's masonry. If you put one at 20 feet, it's a certain type. And if you put one at 30 feet or 25, it's a certain type. And the developer, in this case, on either side of that, either the property owner on one side or the property owner on the other side, can choose whichever one they want to use under that statute, if it's approved. We haven't got to the approval discussion yet, so. Other questions or thoughts?
Yeah, so I think I'm still fuzzy on this. So in our particular situation where we live with the Sunridge facility behind us, there's a retaining wall with a vinyl fence. In the Code 1031, it specifies it should be a masonry fence because it's a transition zone. Now it's been examined whether a masonry fence could be placed on top of that retaining wall, but it doesn't sound like that's viable. So the question then is, can it be built at the ground level up
to
to
8 or
the
10
height of
feet.
6 feet from the other side to provide privacy? And that was my understanding, is that this change may address that, because in the city now you can't build a fence greater than 6 feet in height.
And I can only indicate from what I've read, you cannot have a fence higher than 6 feet. I don't read anything in this proposal, council, that says that the fence is going to be any higher than 6 feet, whether it's a vinyl or chain link or anything else. Did anybody read anything else other than that in that? It's just 6 feet. If it's 6 feet on top of a retaining wall, it's 6 feet on top of a retaining wall, but the fence is still 6 feet.
So it has to be placed on the retaining wall. That's the question, because in this requirement, which is 10-1036, under height, number 1 height, B, it says, a fence or wall located along a property line with a grade difference. The fence or wall may be erected to the maximum fence height permitted by the highest grade at the property line. No ground shall be burned to exceed the maximum allowed height of fences or walls. So that last part doesn't necessarily apply, but
Right.
it seems to indicate that it could be built higher to accommodate that retaining area, if I'm understanding it correctly.
I can't answer that on that particular part of the cause. I think the driving force that got us to this point would be is that there's this ambiguity that exists within contradicting portions of the ordinance. The tasking that the Planning Commission had would be is do your best to try to mitigate that. And this is their attempt to try to find some mitigation for ambiguity. And so I guess the question would be is that are we suggesting with your comment there's still more ambiguity in this ordinance as stated?
I think so.
Okay.
The other conversations that I've had with with Matt, I thought indicated that this review is going to address the particular situation that exists with the Sunridge facility and the retaining wall and the inability to put a masonry fence on that retaining wall, that the facility owners don't feel like it would be structurally sound. So they've built off the property line, that retaining wall. So the question then is, can the fence be built, the solid fence, the screen wall, to a higher height than 6 feet? If it's only built to 6 feet, then it's not going to provide any privacy.
Okay, that's a good question. Let me see if I can, and maybe this is the question has to be asked. There's an issue here that already exists within the current property concern associated with assisted living. What happens in the future if, in fact, this ordinance gets passed as is? And if it gets passed as is because it's an attempt to take the ambiguity out of it, out of the current ordinance, which is, personally, and I've read through it multiple times, is a lot of ambiguity that exists in there. And so which one's right? Which one's right? The one the developer basically used that says, I have a right to put a 6-foot vinyl fence in there, which it says he can? Or is it right that the property owner simply says, no, you should basically be able to put some type of a masonry fence at 6, 8, 10 feet to be able to provide the privacy? That's where the ambiguity exists, because one portion talked about a solid masonry wall, the other one talked about basically a vinyl fence. And so this, I think, is an effort to try to address that. I guess my comment would be is, I'm not so sure we can answer that question in terms of, if this is passed tonight, does that mean everything from here forward to include the assisted living now falls under this new statute? If the answer to that question is yes, then the answer to your question would be is, there will be no fence unless it's put on top of that raised area that can be higher than 6 feet. So if you needed an 8-foot or a 10 or a 12-foot masonry fence, and this is approved as is, and it will now be all future, then my comment would be is, that can't happen. It can't happen because this now takes place at the moment the decision is made, if it's approved, forward. So now is there a grandfather conversation that needs to take place that looks at the past? Because we have an issue that still needs to be resolved. And that issue still has to be resolved, I assume, in the minds of the residents, that says there has been some ambiguity in your ordinance and we still have to fix this problem. And I think your comment would be is, to make it well for the residents, they need a 6-foot or higher masonry fence loaded on the backside of that assisted living. That pretty well accurately state all that?
Yeah, correct. Okay. That it would, so if this doesn't address that, my understanding is that was part of this idea, is that it would permit a fence that would need to be built higher than the current requirements allow.
Okay.
So if it doesn't, then I have a concern related to it, because it's not going to address the issue. And
it's not going to address your issue,
yeah,
which is, if I understand, how high is the retaining wall?
I think it's close
4
to 5
feet?
feet,
Okay.
between 4 and 5 feet.
So we would need, to make that work, we would need a masonry fence that at least at the 11, 12 feet high in order to satisfy that issue. Is that a fair statement? Okay.
Yes, correct.
My personal opinion would be, and I'm not the expert here, but if this is passed tonight, then any project going forward will basically have to fall within the new ordinance. Any project. So if the problem is that the height limit at 6 feet is the problem, then maybe the recommendation to this council, which has the authority to make any modifications if they choose on this, to simply says, raise it to 12 feet. I mean, if that's the option, they surely can consider that. But the key to this, and I think this is important, this issue that we're talking about really is only with this particular assisted living. Going forth to every other one, including the one that was discussed tonight, which still could go forth, and it still deals with assisted living that borders a residential, could very well have to follow whatever's approved tonight in the concept and particularly the site plan development, which means If you want to put it 15 feet from the border, it's got to be masonry. If you want to set it back to 25 feet or 30 feet, you can use chain link with all of the other landscaping. That's really what we're talking about here, okay? A choice. And I think that's why I understand the Planning Commission wants to do is simply take the ambiguity out of it and provide this particular solution. And to the extent by which the council will decide is it a solution. Now, here's the interesting piece. If we modify this ordinance tonight to include a 12-foot or whatever other requirement, then any development that takes place in the city from the time this ordinance is in fact approved, any development then has to follow those same rules, whatever it is. And if it is 12 feet, then the ordinance will have to be changed based on the council's decision, and every organization has the right, okay, an option to put a 12-foot fence, okay, across the backside of the property. And that's how the ordinance will be written, and that's how it'll be done. So, comment.
Well, anything, if it gets approved, any development that comes in from here on out would have to abide by it. Anything from here back is grandfathered under the old code.
That's correct.
I mean, you know, I can't go back to a building in 1977, so you get abide by today.
Right.
Or a building that was built in 2018 to abide by today.
And you're absolutely correct, Steve. The challenge, I think, is the landowners at that point would say, take down the old fence and put a new masonry fence up to the height. That's the future. It basically says to me, unless you tell me otherwise, and Andy, maybe you can help me on this, is that the city can't come back to the landowner and says, the ordinance today says it has to be masonry, you take down your vinyl fence. It says any future development has to comply with the new ordinance. That's what it'll say. But it doesn't say the city was forced them to take an old fence that had to be compliant. That's the grandfather clause component to this. So I think I understand that correct. So I think the question we have to ask would be is that if we're going to take the ambiguity out of this ordinance, do we do it tonight? Do we do it after we resolve this problem that exists within the assisted living and then do it? How do we do that? And I get a little concerned, to be honest with you, is I got another assisted living facility right on the heels of this. And by the way, they have every authority to put that in there as written and they proposed. And if that's the case, we could see a site plan that basically says exactly what we have today, some ambiguity, and then the city faces this problem with this development and any other future developments that take place. So the question the council has to decide is, are we going to address it, fix it tonight? Are we going to postpone it? Are we going to try to work the issue with the existing residents around the existing assisted facility to figure out what's going to happen with there? There's a lot of questions that have to be asked. My only concern personally would be is that we need to make a decision, and we need to make sure that the ambiguity that currently exists within the ordinances does not manifest itself again in new developments that's on the horizon. And I promise you, there's new developments on the horizon. So we got to fix this. One way or another, it's got to be fixed.
So my concern with the proposed changes, if I haven't missed something, is that there is not really a good delineation about buffers between residential and commercial. This is, giving some fencing requirements. I would be concerned about shortening it to 15 feet. If you have a commercial facility of any kind, 15 feet off a property line of a residential homeowner, that's cause for concern. I think should be considered.
And that's a good comment. And by the way, just for the record, the council can simply take the proposal as a part of what's being proposed, approve it with amendments, and then that will drive then the city to go back and make the changes based on if they're approved tonight. So there are some options, okay?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, good comment. Yes, name and address, thank you.
Trudy Crossley, 5552 South, 3750 West. So my concern with what's been struck out is the previous code there for 101031 related specifically to the zoning abutments of a CC and an R1 through 10.
Yes.
This says just any non-residential zoning. So we're taking, we keep saying that some was ambiguous, because we're taking multiple zoning, non-residential zonings requirements and not looking at the specific zoning requirements that were for those two zones specific. They were specific to those two zone abutments. So by striking that all out, you've eliminated a lot of things that were in there that were supposed to protect property rights of the homeowner
Okay.
against the commercial coming in, which is what we're dealing with what we're having on our property line. My other concern with the height difference, the comment made that if he just simply berms it off the property line, 10 feet was mentioned, okay, so they did 2 or 3 feet behind mine. So now they're not technically on the property line. So that's how they get away with not doing a 6 foot from my side fence. They've gone up 4 feet, but it's back 3 feet. So originally it was a 4 foot vinyl fence on top of it. So my concern is anytime there's a berm, someone has brought in the dirt behind any other person's property, you're taking away a view. You're raising yourself up, so all of a sudden privacy does become an issue. You're basically standing on a ladder on the other side. And whether you're 1 foot off the property line or you're 10 feet off the property line, the height is what's at issue. And I know there's been discussion that fence, well, no, it's not, it's got to be measured from the property line. Well, how they were allowed to build 3 feet off the property line to get away with that, I'm not sure how that all happened. Because now we still have our 6 foot fences sitting on the property line that were supposed to be replaced. And if they were gonna bring their dirt up, then they would have brought it up on their property and then put 6 feet. That retains our privacy. But no, they went back, build up, and now you're measuring still back from the original property line where our original fences are sitting. And there's your height problems.
Understand.
It's because you're not reading from the highest elevation. If that's ambiguous, I would say if you brought dirt in and you build it up, whether it's 1 foot, 3 feet, or 10 feet off of the property line, but now you're sitting 4 feet higher than me, that's the elevation change.
Okay.
So I don't like how much has been struck out because I think as property owners, we've lost a lot.
Okay.
This helps the developer, maybe, pick and choose and gives them options, but as a homeowner, we're losing. We're losing out.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Well, those are good comments. Anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, seeing none, got a motion to go out of public hearing?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, Jan?
Aye.
Thank you, okay, didn't hear that, okay, perfect. Any opposed, didn't hear any, we're out of public hearing. Council comments?
Council, if I may?
Please.
If there are concerns, please let me know where it's a concern. We can definitely take this back to the planning commission to look at it and to, lack of better words, rehash it out, but having some direction from the council on what you would like to have changed versus just an unknown and we do kind of on our own. We can definitely do that.
Can we table it for a work session?
I would like that, Joe. I would
That's
like
what my
to see
thought
some
was.
examples. I would like to see what that.
I don't like it the way it is. It's too, you call it, we cleared up ambiguity, but we did it. We kind of made it a free-for-all.
I make a motion, we table it for a work session between the council and the planning commission.
Okay, I have a motion to basically table. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, this is, don't need a roll call vote. All I need is a or nay.
Yay.
All in favor, A?
Aye.
Aye? Any opposed?
I'm not done talking yet.
Oh,
But when
sorry.
it makes a notion, I have to address the
I
notion.
get that. But we're too concerned sometimes of everything, a square peg in the round box. It doesn't work that way. We have different situations throughout the city where we need to be able to say, 6 foot here, maybe 8 foot here, and maybe even 12 foot here. Those things happened right up the street from these guys. They got a 12-foot cinder block wall, is it 10 or 12?
Don't know,
Well,
Depending on where you're at.
it was not allowed, but
But it was allowed because we allowed it.
It's there.
UDOT.
We allowed it. So
UDOT did.
we did, because we're the ones that said, yes, go ahead and let's take care of that, okay? So we need to have that flexibility to still be able to say, this can happen there, and we have to have the ability, when it butts up against residential, that residents do have somewhat of a say, because it does affect them in their backyard. That's what I have to say on that. As far as tabling it, we go back and we're gonna argue amongst ourselves and do the same thing, unless we just refer it back to them to fix it. So I don't know what tabling and us meeting solves.
That's the issue. And interesting enough, I got 2 ayes to table. All I need is 2. I don't need a majority. I don't need a unanimous on that piece of it. So the motion to table is approved. Okay, we'll table it. What we'll do, Matt, is we'll kind of formulate a strategy. It was proposed that we basically do a work session. I'm sensing a comment was a joint work session on this issue. That's the motion that was presented.
Well, that way we can hash it out before it comes back to us, because what I don't want is them to hash it out, it come to us, we say, no, we don't like this. I think we're better off all sitting down together, get it out on the table, we like it, then we go through the formalities, it's approved there, approved here, we're done.
Okay. Then based on that motion to table, we'll table. Matt and I will work out a strategy to work with the planning commission to set up a joint meeting, and then we'll kind of just come some ideas that you might think might help it. Read the ordinance. If the ordinance basically sends some points that were brought out that maybe things that we need to focus on, that'll be a great start. May I make a recommendation? If you can send some things that you're thinking to Matt, he can consolidate maybe some of your ideas and be ready for us when we meet.
Okay, one comment on meeting all together. Yeah, it sounds great on paper, but remember, they are a separate form of government. We're a separate form of government. When you start doing that thing, it takes that away from everybody. And it gets the community to think, hey, what's the point of having a planning commission and city council?
I know.
If you all get together and do that. So you need to be careful with joint meetings all the time.
Right. No, that's absolutely true. There's a purpose, as Dave's suggesting, why we have planning commission and we have city council. They're truly separate entities in this organization, and they're not biased or influenced by either or. But if there is some, as Steve was suggesting, if there are some things that we think as a council may help improve the ordinance before it's approved, then I think we owe it to the process to share with them what we're thinking and then let the planning commission work that. If at the time we basically make a recommendation to have a joint meeting and it's not supported, then because you've provided them the appropriate information, then give them the information, let them work it, and come back with a recommendation.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I know, coming from the planning commission myself, Mayor, you did as well, a few others did. Sometimes you feel like when you're in the planning commission, like, hey, we go through all this and then the council doesn't vote our way. That's totally acceptable, and it's nothing that the citizens or them should take personal, because they look at things independently. They look at what's presented at the moment. They only get the input of who's in the audience. As representative government for the council, we can seek input from any citizen. We can review it, and so that's exactly what you had happen tonight. The council looked at something differently than the planning commission did, and they didn't approve it. And I don't want the commission to walk away thinking they didn't do their job, that the public's against them and we're the good people. That's just part of being an elected official. We can reach out. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had in the last week talking about the rezoning. And so I knew in my mind it wasn't going to happen, but I don't want the planning commission or the citizens to walk away thinking that body didn't do their job, because they are totally independent and separate and have a different look and feel. They're not supposed to go out and solicit input from the citizens.
Good comment. Okay. Just for the record then, we have tabled ordinance 1914. We have now consideration of ordinance 1915, an amendment to the zoning regulation, amendment to chapter 17 under the table of uses. Steve, you got a busy night tonight. Would you like to open that up for a discussion?
Yeah, it's a Steve show today. Again, this was a section of the ordinance that wasn't necessarily ambiguous, but I think at the time it was adopted, and I didn't really get the whole backstory, but I know it was at least in 73, it was kind of this way. It was the limit of number of RVs allowed on the property and the time frame in which you could store them. So that's where this kind of aspect came from. So again, as a definition, it's outside storage of our recreational vehicles limited, because again, there was a limit of numbers. So when you look at the ordinance, and again, blue bold is new, red struck out is to be taken out. So looking at this, right now it says you can't have more than 2 recreational vehicles, and that includes a list of things for a period of exceeding 48 hours. Now, this was, if you had a third one, it couldn't be there for longer than that. Some concerns always is, you know, I pull my trailer in front of my house, load it up, am I in violation? No, because it's not there permanently. This is where can I park my trailer to store it. The Planning Commission went through it. Again, they like giving options. In this case, it was, instead of just giving you a time frame and a number, it's like we asked the question of, does it matter how many RVs I have as long as it's parked on an appropriate surface in the appropriate location? So that's kind of the premise we went on, is does it matter? If Jan has 10 and Paul has 20, as long as it's parked legally, do we care? Answer is no. So that's why the Planning Commission removed the limited number of 2, and really the time frame, because again, how do you know when it was there? How do you know when it wasn't there? Did they move it 2 feet? Did they not move it 2 feet? Again, just kind of get away from that ambiguousness and the difficulty of enforcing it. Every ordinance does have flaws, and every ordinance is difficult to enforce, and this is no different, even though we have gone through it and eliminated some stuff and added some stuff. So again, just to reiterate, you can have as many as you want as long as it's parked on approved surface, asphalt, concrete, or weed-free gravel. That's existing today. We just they put it in the ordinance. This one cannot be parked closer than 5 feet from sidewalk. Again, they looked at it more for safety. So if I'm pulling out of my driveway and I've got my RV parked and I'm coming out, we need some space to be able to look down the street so I'm not on top of somebody as I'm getting out. So if it's parked all the way to property line, there's that ability. Now, are we married to the 5 feet? No, but it was just a good round number to put in there so that there is some safety issues looking at it. Cannot park in or block access to required parking area. Now,
What's that mean? What's that definition?
Exactly.
if you know, every single-family residential home is required, well, today's ordinance is 2 parking, and it can't be within the setback, front and or side. So you've got your garage and it's sitting in the setback, those are your 2 required parking spaces.
Well, if I have a 2-car garage and I park one in the garage and one behind that one, can I still park my RV in front of the other side of the garage?
In front of your required 2-car parking?
What if I'm too deep, not too width?
Well, under today's ordinance, it's side by side. 1973, it was, I think, a single car. Before that was a single car. So if you live in a home that's built in 1955 and has a 1-car garage, I can't make you get a 2-car parking requirement. You're under that ordinance. But if you're parking your trailer in front of that, or where are you parking? You're not.
You roundabout and haven't answered the question yet. Can he park right in front of his garage?
Like this?
Yes.
No, not under what's here. Because again, where are your required parking stalls? If all of a sudden I just build in front of it or set something in there in front of it.
Let me ask you another question.
Because your driveway isn't a
Related
legal
to
parking
all-
spot.
How many citations have we issued for illegal parking of their campers?
I couldn't tell you.
Give me a roundabout.
I couldn't tell you, because I
I'm
don't
thinking very
ask
few.
him that.
I'm thinking very few.
Probably.
Danny, do you know any that police have had to do?
It's an
Mike?
overlay.
I'd say none because they've moved them at my discretion.
Jeff?
I think it's not necessarily a police issue as much as
Right,
probably.
but Mike-
Yes, police is more on the street.
Well, my thinking is two parking, I got one car in the garage, one car behind it. I've still got my two parking spots.
But it's supposed to be side by side, not tandem.
And
That's
why
the way
do
the
I,
ordinance is written.
why do I have a driveway?
Again, my time to. Anyway, again, this is what myself and the planning commission, our thought process. You may not like it, you can change it however you want. Again, we're not married to everything. But their thought was, if you're required to have two side-by-side parking stalls, whether it be your garage or a pad of concrete, and also I put something that's not my car in where it's supposed to be, I've now eliminated one of those required parking stalls. Or if I park in front of it, I've eliminated that required parking stall. The driveway is an exception to the rule because your front yard has to be 100% landscaped except for that's leading to your legal parking. Once you have that, then yes, you can park on your driveway. So again, it was looking at all aspects of it. Do we want to have people park in front of their two-car garage and basically eliminate their required parking? So the thought was, again, can't be blocking it or in front of it. And then the next one is, and I realize that I've misspelled a word. It's lease, but it should be leasee, but all RVs parked on property must be owned by property owner or current leasee.
So the question on that, Grandpa Bob comes to visit his grandkids, brings his Winnebago.
How long is he gonna stay?
2 weeks, maybe a
However the hell
month.
he wants, he's grandpa.
The reason this is there is we don't want property owners that have 9 acres to now start leasing their property to Joe Bob down the street to have him park on his property. Now it's a business, it's
Doesn't
something
that
that
fall
shouldn't be
under
a
something
business.
else of leasing? I don't know.
But
Well,
again,
what if he does
planning
it for
commission's
free?
thought process.
Yeah.
I don't like it any better if it's for free, if it's grandpas and brother-in-laws and uncles and that.
I mean, I don't want it to
unlimited
turn
number.
into a trailer storage, but that was my thought. My father-in-law comes and spends 2 weeks with him, he brings his travel trailer. I don't own it, he can't stay there.
You
Well-
will have the space for it on the side. of
Again,
the house.
the issue is, like I mentioned before, every ordinance has a difficulty in enforcement. Would Mike be able to know that's yours or your grandpa's, especially if you pull it in backwards and have your license plate where he can't see it? Everything's gonna have it, but 95% of people are gonna abide by the law.
I have a hard time even dealing with this particular issue because it became an issue because somebody couldn't see backing out of their house. We're
No,
making-
this became,
yes.
especially when we annexed in, someone asked, why do you care how many
It's
trailers
when
I have?
Government gets a little bit too involved in property rights right here, okay? And that-
Well-
them- I mean, I see both sides of it, but we're making it more deal than what it is. Mike does a job when he gets it. He goes and tells the people to move on the current one, and they take care of it.
The two things I like is you remove the number of units, and I'm okay with parking it on an approved substrate. Other than that, I ought to be able to go right up to the sidewalk. I can block my garage if I want to, and if Grandpa Bob wants to come to my house for a couple weeks, I think it's okay.
Okay,
So-
go ahead. Let me just read exactly what it says today. It says this: outside storage of recreational vehicles. The storage and parking of not more than 2 recreational vehicles, including motorhomes, boats, caravans, trailers, or similar, for a period exceeding 48 hours and owned by the property owner. So here's the key. The top part talks about outside storage, but embedded in the current language says the storage and parking of not more than 2 RV vehicles, including motorhomes and trailers, for a period exceeding 48 hours. And it has to be by the owner of the property. That is very ambiguous to define that in terms of defining exactly, first, who owns it. I'd like to know how, in this case, Mike, you would ever find that answer, because that would be tough. How long they were there, 48 hours, which means you would almost have to, correct me if wrong, you almost chalk the tire to see if it gets moved. And we found evidence that people will actually move a vehicle on the street a little bit to show movement so they don't get the 48-hour clock has to restart. And then how do we make a distinction on recreational vehicles when the comment says similar? Does the issue associated with snowmobiles or UTVs or ATVs constitute a recreational vehicle? And they're on trailers. Does that constitute? Because we see a lot of people in our community that have more than 2 RVs in their parking area, and yet it makes it difficult for us to do that. So it really comes down to this. If we don't believe there's a problem, then strike the whole thing out of the ordinance. If we think we need to clarify, then let's basically clarify it so it's workable. But let me just offer a thought. Please, let's not put Mike in a situation that he has to interpolate, okay, what this particular statement means and how he's going to execute it. Because as it sits right now, to be honest with you, it's unenforceable. It's unenforceable. And why, going back to the comment, why is government putting a law in the land that is unenforceable and most difficult to be compliant with? If it isn't doing what it's designed to do, remove it. If the clarifications being provided in this ordinance basically says, I like part A, B, and C, but D needs to be strike, give me a motion when I ask for a motion to approve to strike out what you think is not, and we'll go see if we can get a vote to approve. But as it sits right now, I question when it says storage and parking to basically be executable as written. And government, if you're going to have a law on the land, then enforce the law. If it doesn't make any sense, get rid of it. But don't put the city in a position where they basically have to interpolate or try to do in compliance with this law, because to be very honest with you, I don't know how Mike would do this. And oh, by the way, it says storage. What happens if the storage of this property is in their backyard? Mike does have the authority as a code enforcement officer to access that backyard. But in some cases, I hope you take somebody with him. I'm just asking you, counsel, if it doesn't make sense as written and you don't like what's being proposed, give us an option, or at least table it and let's push our recommendations back to the planning to make some changes. Otherwise, make the changes here as part of an amendment to this ordinance and we can approve it tonight and move on. What would you like to do? Okay.
Before we get a motion, we'll need to do a public hearing as well.
Yes, I mean, if we make that, we have to go through that process, you're right. But my point to the conversation would be is that the council has the authority to basically make an amendment and change this. And I say, if you like it, let's do it. If you don't want to change it, leave it as it is. If you want to send it back, let's send it back. But I do need to get a motion out of this, okay? So, any more comments on this? Seeing none, do I have a motion then to approve ordinance 1915?
We have to go into public hearing.
Oh, I'm
If you don't
sorry.
get a motion.
I'm sorry, you're
does it
right.
just
I'm sorry, I was
sit
hoping to get
idle?
that dialogue. I've got so many public hearings tonight, we better get that. You're right, I need a motion to go into public hearing, you're right.
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, I got the majority. Thank you.
I say let it go back and
Okay.
rework it.
Now, but you can make that motion after public hearing. So with that then, please, if you have a comment or thought on this, please step up, give us your name and address, and let us hear what you have thinking. Thank you. Name and address?
Glenda Moore, 2888 West, 3825 South.
Thank you.
I have one car. It's slightly bigger than a VW. I'm never going to have anything bigger. But if I want to park vehicles at my house, in my driveway, which is a double driveway, I should be able to do it. Don't make stupid laws. Don't make laws that are just so complicated. Just do something that's enforceable. That's all.
Okay, thank you for your input. Okay, anybody else like to share a thought? Thank you. Just name and address.
Sean Henderson, 4833 South, 4150 West. I was just going to mention that last section there where they were talking about the everything must be owned by the property owner or leasee. And perhaps this is something to be addressed in a different at a different time. But if they're looking towards people not using their property as a business, I agree with that. There's social media, I mean, there's apps out there now that are like Airbnb, but you can rent a space. You can, you got extra space in your basement. You can, have people rent it. And the same thing with RVs. I think that perhaps that should be addressed, so that there's not an excess that, say somebody's got a large piece of property and they just start loading it up and it becomes an eyesore and a nuisance to neighbors. But that was just a thought that I had.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or thoughts? Thank you.
Diane Wilson, 4302 South, 2675 West. I have a tendency to agree with what I've been hearing. I think one of the biggest concerns I have is, as a property owner, we should at least have some rights and limited restrictions. Certainly there needs to be a balance, but I think that we shouldn't lose perspective that as property owners, that is the deal. We own property, and we should have some say to that pursuit of happiness that we have hopefully, that we can continue with that, because that's one of the reasons we have property. And so I really appreciate your thoughts, and if you could rework that to keep that in mind, I think that's very important, and I appreciate all of those comments you've made, because I do believe that what's in red probably should be struck, but also there are many, I think what you've said is great, it just needs a lot of work, so please work on it. Thank you. And if we can help you with that, let us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else would like to share a thought? Thank you.
Lance Haycock, 4490 South, 1650 West. Concur with the red needs to be struck. I didn't realize, we learn a lot coming to these meetings. I didn't realize that, I may be in violation of this. Is a flatbed trailer without RVs on it, is that a recreational vehicle? To me, it's not. If I can roll it with my hands and don't have to use the truck, it's not in the way of my cars. If I have 2 cars wide and 2 cars deep, this makes no sense. So, because I could put a trailer in a car and a trailer in a car and still not hit the sidewalk. Let's keep it simple. And I like to strike the red, leave the first blue, call the rest a mess, and take it off. That's my input, because it makes absolutely no sense to restrict us more, and what goes on in the backyard, put a 10-foot fence around it.
10 foot, huh? Thank you.
At least a
Okay.
6.
Anybody else like to share? Thank you.
Braden Stander, 5544 South, 3750 West. So I tend to agree with everything that's been said. I'll just give you my 2 cents. It's probably worth pesos, but anyways, I think that it needs to be addressed. The red strikes I like. One of the things is it cannot be closer than 5 feet to the sidewalk. A lot of these homes, when they were built, garages and driveways were not thought of. You can't park there. My car is within 1 foot of the sidewalk, so I think that's got to go. And then, I store my dad's trailers, I store my brother's trailers for weeks here and there sometimes, so absolutely need to be able to have some flexibility there. So, but I think what Lance just said sums it up, block out the red, take bullet 1, call it good. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else like to share a thought? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to go out of public hearing?
Yes.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay. Any opposed? Didn't hear any. Okay, council, finishing the thought comments, anything you want to share?
I make a motion, we consider ordinance number 19-14, no, 15, to accept with the amendments to what has been presented, that we cross out the red as there, and we only accept bullet point number 1, and we're done.
Okay, I do have that motion. I think it's well defined. Andy, are we okay with that motion with the amendment?
Sure.
Okay, now, council, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay, the problem is when you throw a motion, I have to follow the motion all the way to the end. You can basically say,
Call the question, so she gets the last. That's-
yeah. So let me do this then. In lack of a motion at this point, okay, or a second, we'll just stop and then allow you to make the comment. So go ahead and make the comment. I'll need another motion.
I just have a question on, are you okay if your neighbors park or are our landowners are okay if the neighbors park several vehicles that don't belong to them on that property?
One thing that I could mention is we could amend that part of the ordinance where it talks about the owner or current lessees to, owner or immediate family members or something along those lines.
And then
That
are we behooved to figure out who is immediate family? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah. Oh,
then
yeah. Yeah,
that
definitely.
creates more ambiguity, but I don't want it to become, just because I have 2 acres of land, I can park 20 RVs on my land, because I think that becomes a
Can we leave,
neighbor issue.
We stop.
But
That's where I'm at.
Okay,
I'm fine, I don't have it, it's not gonna bother me, but it's gonna bother somebody.
Let's
I
go
hate
back
to bring it up, I either gotta call a vote or I have to leave, so that means the meeting's done.
Make a new motion. Let's just go back to the motion still, so let's read it as it is. Storage and parking of recreational vehicles, including motorhomes, boats, caravans, trailers, or similar, must be parked on approved surfaces, asphalt, concrete, or weed-free gravel.
Okay, well, that would prevent a whole bunch unless they put a whole bunch of,
So that would allow everything that they want.
You can't block the sidewalk.
if they put it all on approved stuff.
Asphalt, if they have it, which is your opinion on that. You're the one who's doing it, I wanna hear it.
It's kind of late for me to say anything, because you've already had your public comment.
your staff.
Staff's
The
one.
largest issue we have is fifth-wheel trailers hanging over the sidewalk. Where people can't walk by.
I'd say nothing can block the sidewalk, your back is sidewalk.
Secondly, you're gonna see gravel taking up large sections of backyard. So already starting to create space for more than 1 or 2 trailers.
Okay, then,
The last bullet point is the same as part of that struck out portion,
correct.
owned by the property owner.
That's why I said I only accept bullet number 1. And I would make one more bullet, has to be back of sidewalk.
Well, that,
Okay. Okay, so here's what I need then. We've had good dialogue, appreciate the input. What I need is a motion.
I make a motion that we change table 17-1 to state storage of recreational vehicles and parking of recreational vehicles, including motorhomes, boats, caravans, trailers, or similar, must be parked on approved surfaces, asphalt, concrete, or weed-free gravel. A, B, has to be back of sidewalk. End of story.
Okay? I have a motion for ordinance 1915. Do I have a second, as stated?
I'll second it.
Okay, that requires a roll call vote. Okay, Morgan?
Councilmember Tafoya.
I'm gonna go no, because of Mike's good point that we can start having backyards full of gravel, which is a good valid point.
It's dead then.
Okay, finish it.
Councilmember Burrell.
you seconded it.
I think that makes a point. I'd say no.
Councilmember Paul.
Aye.
Okay,
Motion dies.
motion dies, lack of vote. Okay, if the city would like to bring it back to the council at some point in time, we have to go through a routine to make that work.
Do we have a motion to table, or?
No, it was just killed. So, lack of vote.
Okay, sorry.
Stays as
I
is.
thought the motion was to pass it with Joe's
That's what the motion was, to pass. So if somebody wants to make a motion to table it, they can.
You can do that? Anybody want to make a motion to table? We killed that motion as defined. Anybody want to make a table motion?
Motion to table is throw it with the other meeting that you're having anyway.
I'll second that motion.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay, we got a
I'd
motion
prefer
to
that.
table, and I got a second. This, all I need is an aye. How many vote for it?
Aye.
Aye.
There we go. It's unanimous. Okay, we'll table it and bring this up in some work session or some other approach,
we
okay?
adjourn? 'Cause I
Let the
have to
record basically show that. There is no more requirements here. I have an open public comment period, so if you would like to say anything else or talk about anything else, you're welcome to step up and give us your thoughts on public comment. Anything?
I have to leave.
Diane Wilson, same address. Question is, what is
It's a problem.
the purpose or insisting of having gravel and asphalt on concrete? I was just wondering where that came from and why is that absolutely mandated? Thank you.
Okay,
Just-
it's in the ordinance, but
Yeah, I was just wondering, why is that?
I think it's an environmental thing, Doctor. It has to do with oils and gases and solvents going into groundwater instead of on a solid surface or something that soaks it up.
Because the gravel still is
I guess it's a,
impermeable.
not as much as grass. I'm not expert
I was-
on it, but I believe that's why.
Okay.
okay.
And maybe who would I ask to get? I'm sorry.
Steve, you have an answer for that one? No?
Who would she contact?
Yeah, who would I contact to find out maybe more specifically why that?
Well, we
is-
can, my comment would be is we can take that as an action item from the city. Obviously,
Okay.
it's an engineering discussion. It may require us to reach out to engineering, just provide an answer that way.
Mike
Okay.
also just gave a reason.
Go ahead, Mike. I didn't hear it, Mike. Did
You
you?
also just gave a reason why that would not be.
Solid surface to support the weight of the vehicle. Without it,
Yeah.
you eventually have a trench in the lawn. Puddles water, leads it to the fence, through the fence, and into the yard. Deteriorates the rest of your driveway area. It's all a matter of trying to support the weight of the vehicle and keep it from displacing the soil.
Okay. Does that satisfy your question, or should we do a little more work on it?
And so if that's the case, then I was just wondering, why is that a city matter versus a personal preference matter of the owner? You know, if it does have, if you do have some divots in your land, I was just wondering, you know,
If it
is that
impacts
really
your neighbor's property, which it may,
Mhm.
if you've got a trench on your particular property and it impacts your neighbor's property, then that would be a concern.
Okay,
a lot of ifs, thank you.
thank you. Mike, you want to add to that?
These issues are all driven by what one other code may say. Things are done in a manner to provide, promote beautification of Roy City. And that's where it's headed, is trying to maintain the status of Roy City's appearance. We got a bunch of yards with trenches in them. It's displeasing.
Yeah, okay, that's a good comment. Okay, we'll see if we can provide you a much more exact. Anybody else have a comment or thought they'd like to share? Okay, seeing none, let's work through the city manager and council report. Matt?
Yeah, I actually just have a couple of things for tonight. As you guys know, we have the general election coming up. And with that, on November 5th, we'll be hosting we will not be having our city council meeting as scheduled. So we'll be sending out a cancellation notice on that. But we'll be, we don't need to. So we'll be hosting light snacks at the city offices about 7:45, just here in the council chambers. If you want to come, public's welcome. Candidates are welcome, obviously. If you would like to be involved in that, just come, and it's more of a social, so nothing really programmed there. Second thing is, you've noticed that a lot of people are having a hard time out in the audience. I'm hearing mainly people at the podium. Next week, we have a cancellation of 2 court dates, so we're going to be reconfiguring some of the speaker systems. A lot of the problem that we're having is that when you turn them up too high, it reverbs back into the microphones. So we're going to separate the speakers next week. So hopefully, going forward, we won't have to have a mic there other than the podium mic. So that will be it.
Okay, thank you. Council, any comments, thoughts? Okay, I just got one thing. If you will remember, we do have our trunk or treat that's taking place on the 25th at 5:30. I believe the council is dressing in Western. So if you can make it, bring your cowboy hat. If you got boots, Jane, bring those boots, okay?
Sorry, I won't be there.
I don't have boots, so I have no idea what I'm going to get with those, okay? But I think I have a hat that gets me close. Other than that, that's all I've got. Council, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, okay. And Andy, you're going to have to tell me if in fact I can still hold a meeting when I'm down to 2 city council members.
Well, there wasn't anything left.
No decisions. That's right. Yeah, that's what I figured. Okay.